When a starving mother was turned away from the last store in town, a mysterious cowboy appeared from the shadows with three words that would change everything. Ride with me. What happened next in that frozen Wyoming winter of 1883 wasn't just about survival. It was about a stranger who saw what no one else would, and a woman brave enough to trust again. Stay until the end to see how one act of kindness rebuilt two broken lives, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The wind that December carried teeth. It bit through wool, through skin, through the last shreds of dignity Nora Hayes had left. She stood on the weathered planks outside Thornton's Dry Goods in Sheridan, Wyoming territory, her fingers white-knuckled around the handle of an empty wicker basket. Inside that basket should have been flour, beans, salt pork, something, anything, to put on the table for her boy. Instead, there was nothing but air and shame. "I said no credit, Mrs. Hayes." The shopkeeper's voice carried through the half-open door, loud enough for the entire street to hear. Samuel Thornton stood in his pressed vest and clean collar, a man who'd never missed a meal in his life, looking at her like she was something tracked in on a boot heel. "Mr. Thornton, please?" Nora's voice came out smaller than she wanted, and she hated herself for it. "Just until spring. My husband's pension, there's been a delay with the territorial office, and I've got a boy at home who—" "Your husband's been dead 3 years, ma'am." Thornton's face was stone, and his pension dried up 2 years back. "Now I've carried your account as long as Christian charity allows, but I got a business to run. You understand." She didn't understand. She understood hunger. She understood the way Eli's ribs had started to show through his nightshirt. She understood waking at 3 a.m. with her stomach cramping so bad she had to bite her pillow to keep from crying out and waking her son. But business? No. She didn't understand that at all. "I can work," Nora said, stepping closer to the doorway. "I can clean. I can mend. I'll do laundry. Anything you need." Thornton's mouth twitched with something that might have been pity or might have been disgust. "I got no need for help. And even if I did—" He trailed off, his meaning clear enough. A widow with no prospects, no family, and no money wasn't the kind of employee that reflected well on an establishment. Behind him, Martha Cunningham fingered a bolt of calico, her eyes darting between Nora and the shopkeeper like she was watching a play. 2 other women stood near the pickle barrel, whispering behind their gloved hands. Nora knew them both, had shared church pews with them back when her husband Thomas was alive, and she'd been respectable. Now they looked through her like glass. "Please," Nora whispered one more time, and hated the break in her voice. Thornton's expression hardened. "Go on now. You're blocking my doorway." The door shut with a solid click. Nora stood there a moment longer, feeling the eyes of Sheridan on her back. The town wasn't large, maybe 300 souls on a good day, but right now it felt like 3,000. Every window held a face. Every shadow hid a judgment. She turned slowly, keeping her spine straight and her chin up, even though everything inside her wanted to crumble. The December sun sat low and pale behind a scrim of clouds. Snow had fallen 3 days ago, and what remained lay in dirty ridges along the storefronts. The street itself was frozen mud, rutted deep from wagon wheels. Across the way, a man leaned against the hitching post outside the Red Eagle Saloon. He was tall, taller than most, with shoulders that filled out his canvas coat like he'd been built for hard work. Dark hair curled from beneath a weathered hat, and his face was shadowed, angular, the kind of face that looked like it had seen trouble and come out the other side without flinching. He wore work gloves, scarred leather boots, and a gun belt that sat easy on his hips, the way a man wore a tool he knew how to use but didn't need to prove. He was watching her, not like the others, not with curiosity or pity or contempt. He watched the way a man might watch a storm rolling in, steady, measuring, aware. Nora's cheeks burned. She pulled her shawl tighter and started walking, her boots crunching in the frozen mud. She didn't know where she was going. Home was 3 miles south along the creek, and she'd walked it this morning in the dark. Walking it back empty-handed felt impossible. But staying here, under all these eyes, was worse. She made it maybe 20 feet before the voice stopped her. "Ma'am." It was low, quiet, the kind of voice that didn't need to shout to be heard. Nora froze, her heart hammering. For a wild second, she thought maybe Thornton had changed his mind. But when she turned, it wasn't the shopkeeper. It was the man from the hitching post. Up close, he was even bigger, not bulky, but solid, like an oak that had weathered 50 winters. His eyes were blue, pale, and clear as creek water, and they held her gaze without wavering. There was no judgment in them, no pity either, just something calm and certain. "You got turned away for food," he said. It wasn't a question. Nora's throat tightened. She wanted to deny it, to tell him it was none of his business, to salvage some scrap of pride. But the truth was written all over her, in the hollow of her cheeks, the threadbare shawl, the basket with nothing in it. "I'll figure something out," she managed. He studied her a moment longer, then glanced past her toward Thornton's store. His jaw tightened just slightly. When he looked back, his voice was quieter still. "You got a child at home?" The question landed like a fist. Nora's breath caught. "How did you—" "Saw you asking about cornmeal and molasses through the window. Nobody buys molasses for themselves." He paused. "Boy or girl?" "Boy," Nora whispered. "Eli. He's 7. The man nodded slowly, as if something had been confirmed. Then he straightened, pulling his gloves tighter, and said the words that would split her life into before and after. "Come with me. I'll fill your table tonight." Nora stared at him. The world seemed to tilt slightly, the way it did when you stood up too fast. What?" "I got supplies in my wagon," he said, nodding toward a canvas-covered rig parked near the livery. "More than I need. And I know a place that'll trade fair for fresh meat. You ride with me, I'll see you home with enough to last the week." It was insane. He was a stranger. She didn't know his name, didn't know where he'd come from, or what he wanted. Every warning her mother had ever given her rang loud in her skull. But louder still was the memory of Eli this morning, his small face pinched and pale, asking if there'd be breakfast. "You don't even know me," Nora said. The man's expression didn't change. "Don't have to." "Why would you—" Her voice cracked. "Why would you help me?" For the first time, something flickered in those pale eyes, something almost like sadness, or maybe recognition, because a child shouldn't go hungry on account of his mama's pride, he said quietly, and because nobody should have to beg for what's right. Nora's vision blurred. She blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. Not here, not in the middle of Sheridan, where everyone could see. "I don't have money to pay you back," she whispered. "Didn't ask for money." "Then what do you want?" He was silent for a long moment, his gaze drifting past her toward the mountains that ringed the valley, snow-capped and distant. When he spoke again, his voice carried something she couldn't name, something old and tired and true. "Nothing you ain't willing to give." It should have sounded threatening. It should have sent her running. But the way he said it, quiet and steady, made it sound like the opposite of a demand. It sounded like respect. Nora looked down at her empty basket. She thought of Eli, waiting at home in a cabin that was more gaps than walls, wearing a coat 2 sizes too small. She thought of the winter stretching ahead, cold and merciless. She thought of Thornton's face and Martha Cunningham's whispers, and every door in this town that had closed against her. And then she thought of this stranger, who had no reason to care, offering her something no one else would, a choice. "What's your name?" she asked. "Colt Mercer." "I'm Nora Hayes." He touched the brim of his hat. "Pleasure, Mrs. Hayes." "It's just Nora." The correction came automatically. She hadn't been Mrs. Hayes in any way that mattered for 3 years. Colt nodded, accepting this without comment. Then he gestured toward his wagon. "You ready?" Nora looked back once at Thornton's store, at the warm glow of the lamps inside, at the people moving behind the glass like actors in some play she was no longer part of. Then she turned back to Colt Mercer, this stranger with steady eyes and a voice like gravel and grace, and did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She said yes. "So?" Colt's wagon was old but well kept, the wood oiled and the canvas patched but clean. 2 horses stood in the traces, a matched pair of roans with kind eyes and good feet. Colt offered his hand to help her up onto the bench, and Nora took it, feeling the rough calluses through her worn gloves. He settled beside her, taking up the reins with easy confidence, and clicked his tongue. The horses leaned into their collars, and the wagon lurched forward with a creak of wood and leather. They rolled down Main Street slowly, the wheels crunching through frozen mud. Nora kept her eyes forward, feeling the stairs like brands against her back. Let them look. Let them whisper. She was past caring. Colt didn't speak, and for that she was grateful. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was just there, like the cold or the sky. He drove with the reins loose in his hands, his posture relaxed, and Nora found herself studying him from the corner of her eye. He looked to be in his mid-30s, though the lines around his eyes suggested he'd lived harder than most. His face was weathered but clean-shaven, his hands scarred in the particular way that came from ranch work, rope burns, barbed wire cuts, the thick calluses of a man who worked with his back and his sweat. There was a knife on his belt, a repeating rifle in the boot beside the bench, and saddlebags that looked like they'd seen 1,000 miles. A drifter, Nora thought, or maybe a ranch hand moving between jobs. Either way, a man with no roots, which made his offer even stranger. "Where are we going?" she asked finally, as they cleared the edge of town and turned south onto the creek road. "Little trading post about 2 miles east," Colt said. "Man name of Jensen runs it. He don't ask questions, and he don't judge. You can get flour, cornmeal, beans, whatever you need. I got pelts to trade, and I'll spot you the difference." "I can't let you be—" "You can," Colt said, not unkindly, "and you will. For the boy." Nora's throat closed up. She looked away, out across the valley where the land stretched white and endless under the pale sky. In the distance, the Bighorn Mountains rose like broken teeth, their peaks lost in cloud. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. Colt was quiet for a long time. The only sounds were the jingle of harness, the creak of wheels, the soft huffing of the horse's breath in the cold. Finally, he said, "You ever been hungry, Nora?" The use of her name, spoken so naturally, made something in her chest tighten. "Yes," she whispered. "I mean really hungry, not missing a meal. I mean days without food, weeks, the kind of hungry where you stop feeling it and start feeling nothing at all." Nora looked at him. His profile was hard, carved, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I was 8 years old," Colt said quietly. "My pa died in a mine collapse outside of Leadville. My ma tried to keep us together, me and my 2 sisters, but there wasn't work for a widow with 3 kids, and there wasn't charity neither. One winter, we didn't eat for 5 days straight." He paused, his jaw working. "A man came through town, ranch foreman, heading south. He saw us sitting outside the church, my ma too proud to beg, but too desperate not to hope. He didn't say much. Just told my ma he'd take me on as a stable hand, give me room and board, send wages back to her." "Did he?" Nora asked. Colt nodded. "Every month, like clockwork. I worked that ranch 7 years, learned everything I know about horses and cattle and hard work. And when I was old enough, I sent money home myself. My ma got back on her feet. My sisters got married. They're safe now." He turned to look at her, and his eyes were full of something old and deep. "I ain't never forgot that foreman's face," Colt said, "or the way he didn't make my ma feel small for needing help. He just saw a problem and fixed it because it was the right thing to do." He looked back at the road. "I figure if I can do the same, I ought to." Nora's vision swam. She blinked hard, her hands twisting in her lap. "You don't owe me this," she said. "Maybe not," Colt agreed, "but your boy don't owe the world his hunger neither." They rode in silence after that, the wagon rocking gently over the frozen ruts. Nora felt something loosening in her chest, something that had been clenched tight for so long she'd forgotten it was there. Hope. Dangerous, fragile, impossible hope. Jensen's trading post sat in a shallow draw where Goose Creek bent east, a squat log building with a sod roof and a crooked chimney leaking smoke. A hand-painted sign hung over the door. Jensen's, fair trade, no credit. Colt pulled the wagon up to the hitching rail and set the brake. "Wait here," he said, swinging down. "I'll bring him out." He disappeared inside, and Nora sat alone in the cold, her breath steaming. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was real. This was happening. A stranger was buying her food because her own town had turned its back. She should have felt ashamed. Instead, she felt something closer to relief. The door opened and Colt emerged with a man half his size, wiry, grizzled, with a beard that looked like a bird's nest and eyes sharp as broken glass. Jensen took one look at Nora and spat tobacco juice into the snow. "She good for it?" he asked Colt. "I'm good for it," Colt said calmly. Jensen grunted. "What's she need?" Colt glanced at Nora. "Ma'am?" Nora climbed down from the wagon, her legs shaky. "Flour," she said quietly. "Cornmeal, beans, salt pork if you have it, molasses, coffee." Jensen scratched his beard. "That'll run you about $4. Nora's stomach dropped. $4 might as well have been 400, but Colt just nodded. "I got pelts in the back. 3 beaver, 2 mink, and a wolf hide. That cover it?" Jensen's eyes gleamed. He walked around to the back of the wagon, pulled back the canvas, and examined the pelts with the air of a man who knew his business. He ran his fingers over the fur, checked the curing, held them up to the light. "Pelts are good," he said finally. "Real good. I'll give you $6 trade." "Done," Colt said. "Put 4 toward her supplies. I'll take the rest in tobacco and ammunition." Jensen grinned, showing 3 missing teeth. "Now, that's a deal I can work with." They shook on it, and Jensen waved Nora inside. The trading post was cramped and dim, lit by a single oil lamp and smelling of leather, tobacco, and dried meat. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with canned goods, bolts of fabric, tools, traps, and ammunition. A pot-bellied stove glowed in the corner, throwing off blessed heat. Jensen moved with surprising speed, pulling items from shelves and thumping them onto the counter. Flour in a burlap sack, cornmeal, a tin of molasses, a slab of salt pork wrapped in wax paper, coffee beans in a small cloth bag. Nora watched it pile up, her chest tight. This was more food than she'd seen in 6 months. "You need anything else?" Jensen asked, eyeing her worn shawl. "Got some wool blankets in the back, good ones." Nora hesitated, then shook her head. "This is enough. More than enough." Jensen shrugged. "Suit yourself?" He glanced past her toward Colt, who stood by the door, arms crossed, watching. "You got yourself a good man there, missus. Don't let him go." Heat rushed to Nora's face. We're not. "Course not," Jensen said, but he was grinning like he didn't believe her. Colt stepped forward and helped load the supplies into a crate, then carried it out to the wagon with ease. Nora followed, clutching the molasses tin like a lifeline. As Colt secured the crate under the canvas, Jensen leaned against the doorframe and called out, "You ever need more trade, Mercer? You know where to find me, and you, missus." He pointed at Nora with his pipe. "You hold your head up. Ain't no shame in needing help, only shame is in not giving it when you can." Nora nodded, unable to speak. Colt touched his hat to Jensen, then helped Nora back onto the wagon. As they pulled away, she looked back once and saw Jensen still standing in the doorway, smoke curling from his pipe, watching them go with something that might have been approval. The ride back to her cabin took longer than it should have. Colt drove slowly, letting the horses pick their way through the ruts, and Nora didn't mind. The sun was starting to dip toward the mountains, painting the snow in shades of rose and gold, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel the cold pressing in on her. "Your place far?" Colt asked. "Another mile," Nora said. "South along the creek. There's a cabin. Well, what's left of one." Colt nodded, but didn't comment. They rode in silence, the wagon creaking beneath them, and Nora found herself stealing glances at him again. He sat easy in the cold, like it was nothing, his hands steady on the reins. There was something deeply calm about him, something that made her feel like the world might not be as sharp-edged as she'd thought. "You got family around here?" Colt asked after a while. "No," Nora said quietly. "It was just me and Thomas, my husband. We came out here in '78, homesteaded a claim. He worked as a scout for the Army, and I kept the house. When he died," she trailed off. "There was a pension for a while, then there wasn't, and the homestead claim fell through because I couldn't prove up the land. So now it's just me and Eli." "What happened to your husband?" Colt's voice was gentle, like he knew the question might hurt. "Killed by Lakota raiders," Nora said, the words flat and practiced. 3 years ago, up near Tongue River. They sent his body back, and the Army gave me a flag, that was all. Colt was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm sorry." "Me too." They passed a stand of cottonwoods, bare branches clawing at the sky, and the creek came into view, narrow and frozen, winding through the valley like a silver thread. "That it?" Colt nodded toward a shape in the distance. "That's it," Nora said, and tried not to hear the defeat in her own voice. The cabin leaned like a drunk. It had been built quick and rough. The logs chinked with mud that had cracked and fallen away over the years. The roof sagged in the middle, and one corner of the porch had collapsed entirely. Smoke rose from the chimney, thin and weak, barely enough to keep the frost out. Colt pulled the wagon up to the porch and set the brake. He didn't say anything about the state of the place, which Nora appreciated more than she could say. The door flew open, and Eli burst out. He was small for 7, too small, with knobby knees and arms like sticks. His hair was dark like hers, his eyes wide and bright despite the hunger. He wore a coat that had belonged to his father, the sleeves rolled up half a dozen times, and boots that were more whole than leather. "Mama!" he shouted, then stopped dead when he saw Colt. "It's all right," Nora said quickly, climbing down. "This is Mr. Mercer. He's a friend." Eli looked at Colt with the wary suspicion of a child who'd learned not to trust easily. "You got food?" Colt's expression softened. "I got more than that. You like rabbit stew?" Eli's eyes went wide as moons. "Yes, sir." "Then let's get this inside," Colt said, swinging down from the wagon. He pulled the crate from the back like it weighed nothing and carried it up onto the porch. Eli danced around him, trying to peek inside, and Nora felt her throat close up again. Inside, the cabin was even worse than the outside suggested. It was one room, 12 feet by 12, with a stone fireplace on one end and a rope bed on the other. A table and 2 chairs sat in the middle, both wobbly. There were gaps in the walls where the chinking had fallen out, and the wind whistled through like a living thing. But it was warm, or warm enough, and it was theirs. Colt set the crate on the table and straightened, looking around. Nora saw him take in the patched quilt on the bed, the empty shelves, the lack of everything. But his face didn't change. "You got a pot?" he asked. "Yes," Nora said. "And a skillet." "Good. I'll start the stew. You get a fire going under that pot, and we'll have supper before full dark." He moved with the kind of efficiency that came from years of practice, pulling ingredients from the crate, setting them on the table. Eli stood beside him, eyes huge, watching every movement like it was a magic trick. Nora found herself moving too, without thinking, fetching the pot, filling it with water from the bucket by the door, hanging it over the fire. Colt produced a skinned rabbit from his saddlebag, along with an onion, a carrot, and a handful of herbs wrapped in cloth. "Where'd you get a rabbit?" Nora asked, astonished. "Snared it this morning," Colt said, chopping the onion with quick, sure strokes. "Was planning on supper for myself, but I figure it'll stretch for 3. He worked quickly, adding the meat to the pot, then the vegetables, then a pinch of salt and the herbs. The smell that rose from the pot was enough to make Nora's knees weak. Eli pressed close to the fire, his nose twitching. "That smells like heaven," he whispered. Colt smiled, small and private. "Close enough." While the stew simmered, Colt pulled flour and cornmeal from the crate. "You got a bowl?" he asked Nora. She handed him one, and he set to work making biscuits, measuring by eye, his hands quick and practiced. Nora watched, fascinated. She'd never seen a man cook like this. Not just competent, but comfortable, like it was second nature. "You do this often?" she asked. "Every day," Colt said, kneading the dough. "Can't afford to eat out when you're riding from job to job." "Where are you headed?" Nora asked, then immediately regretted the question. It sounded too much like she was prying, or worse, hoping he'd stay. But Colt just shrugged. "South, maybe. There's a ranch outside of Casper that needs hands come spring, or maybe I'll head west, try my luck in Montana." He looked up, his blue eyes meeting hers. "Why?" "Just curious," Nora said quickly, turning away to stir the stew, but she felt his gaze linger a moment longer before he went back to his biscuits. By the time the sun set, the cabin was filled with warmth and the smell of food. Colt pulled the biscuits from the fire, golden and perfect, and ladled stew into 3 tin bowls. They sat at the table. Eli practically vibrating with excitement, Nora feeling like she was in a dream, and Colt quiet and steady between them. "Go ahead," Colt said to Eli. "Dig in." Eli didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed a biscuit and tore into it, then shoveled stew into his mouth so fast Nora was afraid he'd choke. "Slow down," she said gently. "It's not going anywhere." But Eli couldn't slow down. He ate like he was afraid it would disappear, and Nora understood because she felt the same way. The stew was rich and savory, the biscuits soft and buttery, and it was the best meal she'd had in years. Colt ate slowly, watching them both with something that might have been satisfaction. When Eli finished his bowl and looked hopefully at the pot, Colt smiled. "Go on," he said. "There's plenty." Eli filled his bowl again, and Nora felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back and focused on her own food, but the gratitude was overwhelming. When supper was done and the bowls scraped clean, Eli slumped back in his chair with a sigh of pure contentment. "That was the best thing I ever ate," he said solemnly. Colt grinned. "Glad you liked it, son." The word son made Eli's face light up, and Nora's heart clenched. Her boy was so hungry for kindness, for a man's attention, for something steady. She'd tried to be enough for him, mother and father both, but she knew she was failing. "Mr. Mercer," Eli said, suddenly serious, "are you going to stay?" The question hung in the air. Nora froze, her breath catching. Colt looked at Eli for a long moment, then at Nora. His expression was unreadable. "Don't know yet," he said finally. "Why?" "Because Mama needs help," Eli said simply, "and I can't do it all by myself." Nora's face burned. "Eli, it's all right," Colt said quietly. He looked at Eli, his gaze steady and kind. "You're a good boy for looking out for your mama. That's a man's job, and you're doing it well." Eli's chest puffed up a little. "But I'll tell you what," Colt continued, "I'll stick around a bit. Make sure you got enough wood for the winter. Maybe patch that roof. How's that sound?" "Really?" Eli's eyes went wide. Colt nodded. "Really?" Nora opened her mouth to protest, to say he didn't have to, that they'd manage, that she didn't want to be a burden. But the words wouldn't come. Because the truth was, she did need help. And Eli couldn't do it alone. And this stranger with steady hands and a quiet voice was offering her something she'd thought was gone forever. A chance. "Thank you," she whispered. Colt looked at her across the table, the firelight flickering in his blue eyes. "Don't thank me yet," he said softly. "Still got a lot of work to do." Outside, the wind howled across the valley, shaking the cabin's walls. But inside, for the first time in 3 years, Nora Hayes felt warm. And for the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel alone. Colt Mercer kept his word. The next morning arrived cold and clear, the sky a hard blue that promised no mercy. Nora woke before dawn, as she always did, her body trained by years of survival to rise when the world was still dark. She lay under the thin quilt for a moment, listening to Eli's soft breathing from his pallet near the fire, and wondered if yesterday had been real or just some fever dream born of desperation. Then she heard the sound of an axe biting into wood. She sat up fast, her heart hammering. Through the gap in the chinking, she could see movement in the yard, a tall figure working in the gray pre-dawn light, steady and rhythmic. Colt had made camp somewhere nearby, she realized. He hadn't left. Nora dressed quickly in the cold, pulling on her worn dress and the shawl that was more holes than wool. She stepped out onto the sagging porch and stopped. Colt stood in the yard, his coat hung on a fence post, working in just his shirt despite the cold. He'd found her pathetic woodpile, little more than a few half-rotted branches, and was systematically splitting logs he must have hauled from somewhere down by the creek. The axe rose and fell with the precision of long practice, and already there was a neat stack of firewood growing beside the cabin. He looked up when he heard the door, lowering the axe. His breath steamed in the cold air. "Morning," he said, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "You came back," Nora said stupidly. "Said I would." He buried the axe in the stump he was using as a chopping block and reached for his coat. "Figured you could use the wood. Gets colder before it gets warmer." Nora wrapped her arms around herself, fighting the urge to cry. She'd forgotten what it felt like when someone did what they said they would do. "I'll make coffee," she managed. "I'd appreciate that." She went back inside and built up the fire with hands that shook slightly. The cabin still smelled of last night's stew, and there were leftovers in the pot, enough for breakfast. She set coffee to boil and watched through the window as Colt worked, his movements efficient and unhurried. By the time the sun crested the mountains, painting the snow gold, he'd split enough wood to last them a week. He stacked it against the cabin wall where it would stay dry, then came inside stomping snow from his boots. "Coffee smells good," he said. Nora poured him a cup, her hand steadier now. "There's stew left from last night. Not much, but that'll do fine." Eli stirred then, his dark hair sticking up in all directions. He blinked at Colt, then his face split into a grin. "You're still here." "Told you I would be," Colt said, accepting the coffee from Nora with a nod of thanks. "You gonna teach me to split wood?" Eli asked, scrambling out of bed. "Maybe when you're bigger. For now, you can help me stack it. That's important work too." Eli practically glowed. Nora ladled out stew for all three of them, and they ate in comfortable silence. When breakfast was done, Colt pushed back from the table and looked around the cabin with an assessing eye. "That roof needs work," he said, "and those gaps in the walls. You got any spare lumber?" Nora shook her head. "Thomas used everything we had just to build it. I've been stuffing the gaps with rags and old newspaper." Colt nodded slowly. "All right, I'll see what I can do with what's around. Eli, you want to help?" "Yes, sir." They worked through the morning, Colt teaching Eli how to gather pine pitch from the trees down by the creek, how to mix it with dried grass to make chinking for the walls. Nora watched from the window as her son followed the tall cowboy around like a shadow, his small face serious with concentration. She should have felt guilty, should have told Colt he didn't need to do this, that they'd manage, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself cleaning the cabin with an energy she hadn't felt in months, sweeping the dirt floor, scrubbing the table, mending the tears in Eli's coat that she'd been putting off for weeks. Around noon, Colt came back inside carrying an armload of stripped willow branches. "These'll help patch the roof," he said. "Won't be perfect, but it'll keep the snow out." "How long have you been awake?" Nora asked, suddenly realizing he must have been working since before dawn. "Long enough." He set the branches down and accepted the cup of water she offered. "I don't sleep much anyway." There was something in the way he said it, something that suggested long nights and old ghosts. Nora wanted to ask, but didn't. She understood about ghosts. "I could make lunch," she offered instead. "There's cornmeal for Johnny cakes." "That sounds good." While she cooked, Colt climbed up onto the roof. Nora heard him moving around up there, heard the sound of branches being woven and secured. Eli stood in the yard, handing up tools and supplies, importantly, doing his part. By the time she called them in for lunch, the worst of the gaps were sealed, and the cabin felt noticeably warmer. They ate Johnny cakes with molasses, and Eli talked nonstop about everything he'd learned, how to test wood for rot, how to choose the right branches, how to tie a proper knot. Colt listened with patient attention, correcting gently when needed, praising when earned. Watching them, Nora felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been frozen solid for 3 years. After lunch, Colt stood and stretched. "I need to ride into town. Got some business to tend to. Should be back before dark." Eli's face fell. "You're leaving?" "Just for a few hours, son. You can help your mama while I'm gone. There's still wood to stack." "Will you really come back?" The question was small, uncertain. Colt crouched down so he was eye level with the boy. "I give you my word, and my word is good. You understand?" Eli nodded solemnly. "Good man." Colt stood and touched his hat to Nora. "Ma'am." "Be safe," she said, and meant it more than was probably proper. She watched him ride away, his figure growing smaller against the white expanse of the valley, and tried to ignore the hollow feeling in her stomach. He'd come back. He'd given his word, but she'd heard promises before. The afternoon stretched long. Nora and Eli stacked wood, then she set him to sweeping while she tackled the mending she'd been avoiding. The cabin felt emptier somehow, quieter, even with both of them there. "Mama?" Eli said after a while. "Yes, honey? Is Mr. Mercer going to be my new pa?" Nora's needle stilled. "What makes you ask that?" Eli shrugged, suddenly fascinated by his boots. Billy Johansen's ma got remarried last year. He said it's what happens when pa's die. You get a new one. Nora set down her mending and pulled Eli close. It's not that simple, sweetheart. But I like him, Eli said quietly. He's nice, and he knows stuff. And he doesn't look at you like the people in town do. That last observation cut deep. Nora pressed her cheek against Eli's hair. I like him too. But Mr. Mercer is just passing through. He's got his own life to live. Maybe he could live it here, Eli said hopefully. Maybe, Nora said, even though she knew better than to hope for such things. But we can't count on it. We have to be ready to take care of ourselves. I know, Eli said, but it's nicer when he's here. Yes, Nora whispered. It is. The sun was sinking toward the mountains when they heard hoofbeats. Eli flew to the window. He's back! Mama, he came back! And he had. Colt rode into the yard on his big roan horse, but this time there was a second horse trailing behind, a pack animal loaded with supplies. Nora stepped out onto the porch, her heart climbing into her throat. Colt swung down and started unloading. Eli ran to help, and Nora descended the steps slowly, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. Lumber. Good lumber, cut and planed. A roll of tar paper. A box of nails. A pane of glass for the window that had been stuffed with rags for 2 years. Cans of food. A bolt of wool fabric. A small sack that looked like it might be sugar. What is all this? Nora breathed. Supplies, Colt said simply. Figured if I'm going to fix this place proper, I need proper materials. I can't pay for this. Didn't ask you to. He kept unloading, not meeting her eyes. Had some back wages coming from a ranch up north. Been carrying the scrip around for months. Might as well use it for something worthwhile. Nora stood frozen, watching him work. Eli had already grabbed an end of the lumber and was trying to help carry it, his small face bright with effort. The supplies kept coming, more than she could have bought with 6 months' worth of money back when she'd had money. Why? The word came out broken. Why are you doing this? Colt finally stopped and turned to face her. In the fading light, his eyes were very blue and very serious. Because that boy in there deserves a house that don't leak, he said quietly. And because you deserve not to freeze to death trying to keep him warm. And because... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Because when I rode away from here this afternoon, all I could think about was riding back. And that ain't something that happens to me much. The confession hung in the cold air between them. Nora's breath caught. I don't understand you, she whispered. Don't have to understand it, Colt said. Just have to let me help. Before she could respond, Eli called out from the cabin. Mr. Mercer, where do you want this? The moment broke. Colt turned away, and Nora pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart hammer against her ribs. She didn't understand him. Didn't understand why a drifting cowboy would spend his wages on a broken cabin and a widow he barely knew. But she was starting to understand something else. She was starting to hope. And that was terrifying. They spent the evening unloading and organizing supplies. Colt carried the heavy lumber like it weighed nothing, stacking it carefully under the eaves where it would stay dry. The tar paper he rolled out to inspect, nodding with satisfaction. The glass pane he handled with particular care, wrapping it in cloth and setting it inside where it wouldn't break. Nora made supper from the supplies he'd brought, beans with salt pork, cornbread, and coffee that was actually fresh instead of thrice-boiled grounds. There was even a tin of peaches, which Eli regarded with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. Can we open it? He asked breathlessly. Save it for something special, Nora said. This is special, Eli insisted. Mr. Mercer came back. Colt laughed, a low, rusty sound, like he didn't do it often. The boy makes a fair point. So they opened the peaches and ate them with the cornbread, the sweet syrup sticky on their fingers, and Nora couldn't remember the last time she'd seen her son smile so wide. After supper, Colt pulled out a whetstone and started sharpening his knife, while Eli peppered him with questions. Where had he been? What had he seen? Did he know how to shoot a gun? Could he teach him? You're too young for shooting yet, Colt said. But I can teach you other things. How to read tracks, how to tell good water from bad, How to start a fire in the rain. Really? Really, those things will keep you alive longer than any gun. Eli absorbed this wisdom solemnly. Then, with the sudden topic shift of children, he asked, "Do you got a family?" Colt's hand stilled on the knife. For a moment, Nora thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said quietly, "Had one once. My ma passed 5 years back. My sisters are married and settled. Got nieces and nephews I ain't never met." "Why don't you visit them?" Eli asked. "They got their lives. I got mine." Colt went back to sharpening, the steel singing against the stone. "I ain't much for staying in one place." "Why not?" It was such a simple question, asked with such genuine curiosity, that Colt actually paused to consider it. "I guess," he said slowly, "because every place I ever stayed, I eventually had to leave. Got to where it was easier just to keep moving. Don't miss what you never stopped for." "That sounds lonely," Eli said. Colt looked at the boy for a long moment. "Sometimes it is," he admitted. Nora's throat tightened. She busied herself cleaning up the supper dishes, but she was listening to every word. "You could stay here," Eli said hopefully. "Then you wouldn't be lonely." "Eli," Nora said gently, "don't pester Mr. Mercer." "I'm not pestering. I'm just saying—" "It's all right," Colt interrupted. He slid the knife back into its sheath and looked at Eli with surprising gentleness. "I appreciate the offer, son, but I got obligations, places I said I'd become spring." "Oh." Eli's face fell. "How long can you stay?" "Don't know yet. Long enough to get this place fixed proper. After that—" He shrugged. "We'll see." It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a no either. Eli seemed to take comfort in that, settling back against the hearth with a contented sigh. Later, after Eli had fallen asleep, Nora stepped out onto the porch for a breath of air. The night was cold and clear, the stars sharp as broken ice. She wrapped her shawl tighter and stood looking out at the valley, at the dark line of the creek, at the mountains black against the sky. The door opened behind her and Colt stepped out. He didn't speak, just stood beside her, his presence solid and warm. "You didn't have to do all this," Nora said finally. "I know. I can't repay you. Didn't ask you to." "Then what do you want?" She turned to face him, frustrated and grateful and confused all at once. "Nobody does this much for nothing. There has to be something you want." Colt was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the horizon. When he spoke, his voice was low and honest. "I want to know that when I ride out of here, you and that boy will be all right. That you'll have a roof that don't leak and walls that keep the cold out and food enough to last the winter. That's what I want." "Why does it matter?" Nora whispered. "Why do we matter?" He turned to look at her then, and the starlight caught in his eyes. "Because I ain't seen someone fight as hard as you're fighting in a long time," he said quietly. "Because you got every right to be bitter and broken, but instead you're standing here trying to keep your boy safe and fed and loved. That takes a kind of courage most folks don't have." He paused. "And because when I saw you standing outside that store yesterday, something in me just knew you were worth stopping for." Nora's vision blurred. "I'm not special. I'm just trying to survive." "That's what makes you special," Colt said. "You're still trying." They stood together in the cold, not touching but close enough to share warmth. Nora felt something shifting inside her, something that had been locked down tight for 3 years starting to open. "How long will you stay?" she asked, echoing Eli's question. "As long as it takes," Colt said, "and maybe a little longer." It wasn't a promise, but it was enough. The next morning, Colt started on the roof in earnest. He worked through the morning cold, tearing off the worst of the rotted shingles and replacing them with new lumber. Nora could hear him up there, hammering with steady rhythm while she went about her chores inside. Around midday, she heard voices and looked up to see 2 riders approaching the cabin. Her stomach clenched. Visitors usually meant trouble. Colt climbed down from the roof, wiping his hands on his pants. The riders pulled up. 2 men she recognized from town. Frank Dawson and Pete Riley, ranch hands from one of the big spreads north of Sheridan. "Help you?" Colt asked, his tone neutral but his posture watchful. Dawson, the older of the 2, spat tobacco juice into the snow. Just curious what you're doing out here, friend. This is Ms. Hayes's place. I know whose place it is. She hired me to do repairs. That's so? Dawson looked toward the cabin where Nora stood in the doorway. You paying him, Nora? Because word in town is you ain't got two coins to rub together. Heat flooded Nora's face. That's none of your concern, Frank. Just seems odd, Riley chimed in. A stranger coming around doing all this work for free makes a man wonder what he's expecting in return. The insinuation was clear and ugly. Colt went very still. You got something to say, he said quietly. Say it plain. Dawson grinned, showing brown teeth. Just saying it's interesting. Widow woman, man passing through. People talk. Let them talk, Colt said. I ain't concerned with gossip. Maybe you should be. This here's a decent community. We look after our own. Funny, Colt said, his voice dropping lower. Because from where I'm standing, your decent community let this woman and her boy damn near starve, so you'll forgive me if I don't take lessons in decency from you. Dawson's face darkened. You best watch your mouth, Drifter. Or what? Colt's hand didn't move toward his gun, but something in his posture shifted. You gonna run me off? You're welcome to try. The air went tight and dangerous. Riley's hand dropped toward his pistol, and Nora's heart stopped. Frank, Pete. She stepped off the porch, forcing her voice to stay calm. Mr. Mercer is here because I asked him to be. He's been nothing but respectful. If you got a problem with that, you can take it up with me. Dawson looked at her, his expression caught between contempt and something uglier. You sure that's the story you want to stick with, Nora? Because once your reputation's gone, my reputation was gone the day Tom died, and this town decided I wasn't worth helping, Nora said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. So you can take your concern and ride back to town with it. We don't need it here. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Dawson spat again and yanked his horse's head around. Don't say we didn't warn you, he muttered, and kicked his horse into a trot. Riley followed, casting one last dark look over his shoulder. When they were gone, Nora let out a shaking breath. Colt stood motionless, watching until the riders disappeared over the rise. I'm sorry, Nora said quietly. I didn't think... You got nothing to apologize for. Colt turned to face her and his eyes were hard. But they're right about one thing. People will talk. Let them. Nora. He said her name gently. I don't care what they say about me. But you and Eli, you gotta live here after I'm gone. If they decide you're not respectable, then they'll treat me exactly like they already do, Nora interrupted. I lost respectable 3 years ago, Colt. All I got left is survival. And right now, you're the only reason we might actually survive the winter. She wrapped her arms around herself. So let them talk. At least we'll be warm while they do it. Something shifted in Colt's expression, something almost like admiration. You're tougher than you look. I have to be. He nodded slowly, then looked back at the roof. Then I better get back to work. Weather's turning. Want to have this sealed before the next snow. He climbed back up and Nora went inside, her hands still shaking. Through the window, she could see Eli playing with a stick near the woodpile, oblivious to what had just happened. She was glad. Let him have one more day of believing the world was kind. The afternoon passed in tense quiet. Nora couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, though when she looked, there was nothing but empty valley. By evening, Colt had finished the worst of the roof and come inside to warm up. It'll hold now, he said, accepting coffee gratefully. Next storm won't get through. Thank you. He looked at her across the small cabin. You worried about those men? A little, Nora admitted. They'll tell everyone in Sheridan. By Sunday, the whole town will know you're here. That bother you? It should. She stirred her coffee absently. But honestly, I can't bring myself to care. They already decided I was beyond help. At least now I actually am getting help. Colt's mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile. You got more spine than half the men I've known. Spine doesn't put food on the table. No, but it keeps you standing while you figure out how to get it there. He paused. You ever think about leaving, going somewhere where folks don't know you? Nora shook her head. With what money? And go where? At least here I got a roof, barely, but it's mine. Or it was Tom's, which is close enough. What about family? You got people anywhere? My parents died of cholera when I was 16, no siblings. Tom was an only child too. She set down her coffee. It's just us. Has been for a long time. Colt absorbed this quietly. Then he said, Well, you ain't alone now. The word settled into Nora's chest like a warm coal. She wanted to ask what he meant, how long now would last, whether he meant it as more than just these few days. But she was afraid of the answer, so she just nodded. That night, after Eli was asleep, Colt prepared to head back to his camp. He'd been sleeping rough somewhere down by the creek, refusing Nora's offers of the floor by the fire. Too cold for camping, Nora protested. You'll freeze. I've slept in worse. He pulled on his coat, checking that his rifle was secure. Besides, with those men sniffing around, it's better if I'm not here at night. Don't need to give them more to talk about. I don't care what they... I know you don't, but I do. His expression was serious. Your reputation matters, Nora. For Eli, if not for you. He'll have to grow up in this town. Go to school here, make friends here. I won't be the reason he gets treated like dirt. Nora wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. In a place like Sheridan, reputation was currency, and hers was already devalued. Better not to make it worse. Be careful, she said instead. It's dark. I'll be fine. He touched his hat. See you in the morning. She watched him disappear into the night, then barred the door and climbed into bed beside Eli. But sleep was long in coming. She lay in the dark listening to the wind, thinking about blue eyes and steady hands, and the way Colt said her name like it meant something. She was in danger, she realized, not from Colt, but from her own heart, which was starting to hope for things that couldn't be. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Colt arrived each morning at first light and worked until dusk. He fixed the window, installed the glass pane so the cabin actually held heat. He patched the gaps in the walls with proper chinking mixed from clay and grass. He reinforced the porch so it no longer sagged. He built shelves for the pantry and a proper ladder up to the loft where Eli could sleep, giving Nora back her privacy. He worked with the focused intensity of a man who knew his time was limited, and Nora tried not to think about what that meant. Eli followed him everywhere, soaking up knowledge like parched ground, soaking up rain. Colt taught him how to set snares for rabbits, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to tell good timber from bad. He was patient and kind, treating the boy like he mattered, and Nora watched her son blossom under the attention. At night, they shared supper, always something simple but filling. Colt had a gift for stretching supplies, for making a little bit go a long way. He told stories sometimes, tales of places he'd been and things he'd seen, and Eli listened with wide eyes while Nora tried to memorize the sound of his voice. A week passed, then two. December deepened, and the cold came hard, but the cabin stayed warm. The supplies Colt had brought were lasting, supplemented by the rabbits he snared and the occasional grouse he shot. Nora found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, the way he moved, efficient and sure. The way his hands worked, scarred but gentle. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't paying attention, like he was trying to figure something out. She was falling, she realized. Falling into something that had no future, no promise, no safety. And she couldn't seem to stop. One evening, Colt stayed later than usual. Eli had fallen asleep by the fire, worn out from a day of helping haul water. Colt sat mending a harness while Nora worked on patching Eli's spare shirt. You're good at that, Nora observed, watching his hands work the leather. Had lots of practice. He tied off a stitch and examined his work. Been working ranches since I was 15. You learn to fix things yourself or they don't get fixed. Is that what you've always done? Ranch work? Mostly. Tried mining for a year down in Colorado. Damn near got myself killed when a tunnel collapsed. After that, I figured I'd stick to open sky. He glanced at her. What about you? What'd you do before Tom? Taught school in St. Louis, Nora said. That's where I met him. He came to town recruiting for a wagon train west, full of stories about wide open spaces and opportunities. I was young and stupid enough to believe him. You regret it? Nora considered. I regret how hard it was, how naive I was about what homesteading really meant. But I don't regret Eli. And there were good years before Tom died. They were hard, but they were good. Colt nodded slowly. He was lucky to have you. I don't know about that. I couldn't save him. Not your job to save everyone, Colt said quietly. Sometimes all you can do is love them while they're here and keep going after they're gone. The words hit something deep in Nora's chest. She set down her sewing and looked at him across the firelight. Is that what you do? She asked softly. Keep going? It's all I know how to do. He met her eyes, and for a moment the careful distance he maintained seemed to waver. Until lately, anyway. What changed? He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I met a woman standing outside a store, too proud to beg and too brave to give up. And something in me just stopped moving. Nora's breath caught. The air between them felt charged, fragile. Colt, I know, he said before she could finish. I know I got no right. I know I'm just passing through. I know a woman like you deserves better than a drifter with nothing but a horse and a rifle to his name. He looked down at his hands. But I gotta tell you, Nora, these past 2 weeks have been the first time in 10 years I've woken up wanting to be somewhere, instead of just needing to be there. And that's because of you. Tears pricked Nora's eyes. You can't say things like that. Why not? Because you're leaving. You said so yourself. Come spring, you'll ride out, and Eli and I will still be here. And if I let myself believe, if I let myself hope, her voice broke. It'll hurt too much when you go. Colt set down the harness and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. What if I didn't go? Nora's heart stopped. What? What if I stayed? He looked at her, his eyes intense. What if I found work at one of the ranches nearby? I could build a place of my own, or... He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. Or I could stay here. Help you work this land. Be the help you and Eli need. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. His voice was low, urgent. I'm saying I'm tired of drifting. I'm saying I found something here worth staying for. I'm saying... He stopped, then started again more carefully. I'm saying I care about you, Nora. You and that boy. More than I got any right to. Nora pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting tears. Everything in her wanted to say yes, to reach across the space between them and hold on to this chance with both hands. But fear held her back. Fear that it was too good to be true. Fear that he'd change his mind. Fear that she was just another charity case to him. I can't, she whispered. I can't let myself believe that. Something like pain crossed Colt's face. Why not? Because I've been let down before. Because people make promises they don't keep. Because... She looked at Eli sleeping peacefully by the fire. Because it's not just me anymore. If you leave, Eli will be devastated. He already loves you, and I won't let him get hurt like that. Colt followed her gaze to the sleeping boy. His jaw tightened. I wouldn't hurt him, he said quietly. Or you. You might not mean to, but if you go, then I won't go. He looked back at her, his expression fierce. Nora, I'm not making some half-baked promise here. I'm telling you I want to stay. That I'm choosing to stay. There's a difference. What about those obligations you mentioned? Places you said you'd be? I'll send word. Explain. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. Look, I know you got no reason to trust me. I'm some stranger who showed up 2 weeks ago, but I'm asking you to take a chance, to let me prove I mean what I say. Nora stared at him, her heart hammering. Every instinct screamed that this was dangerous, that hoping was dangerous, that trusting was dangerous, that letting herself feel anything for this man was the most dangerous thing of all. But another part of her, the part that was so tired of being afraid, so tired of facing everything alone, whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was real. I don't know how, she admitted finally. I don't know how to trust like that anymore. Colt's expression softened. Then don't. Not yet. Just let me stay. Let me keep helping. And maybe in time you'll see I'm not going anywhere. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even a promise, exactly. But it was honest and real, and more than anyone had offered her in 3 years. Slowly, Nora nodded. All right, she whispered. Stay. The word hung between them like a prayer. Colt's face transformed. Not quite a smile, but something close, something hopeful. "All right," he echoed. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the newly patched walls. But inside, the fire burned warm, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Nora Hayes felt something unfamiliar blooming in her chest. It felt dangerously like joy. The morning after Colt said he would stay, Nora woke to find 6 inches of fresh snow blanketing the valley. She stood at the window watching fat flakes drift down from a pearl gray sky, and for the first time in years the sight didn't fill her with dread. The cabin was warm, the pantry had food, and somewhere down by the creek, a man who'd promised not to leave was probably already awake, preparing for another day of work. She was right. By the time she had coffee boiling, she heard his boots on the porch, heard him stamping snow off before he knocked. It was a small courtesy, knocking instead of just walking in, but it meant something. Respect, boundaries, an acknowledgement that this was her home, and he was a guest in it. "Come in," she called. Colt pushed through the door carrying an armload of firewood, his hat and shoulders dusted white. "Morning," he said, his breath steaming. "Came early. Snow's just starting and I want to get the barn beam reinforced before it gets worse." Nora blinked. "What barn?" "That lean-to out back." He set the wood down carefully. "It's not much, but if we shore it up proper, you could keep a milk cow in there come spring, maybe some chickens. Give you a steady source of food." "I don't have a cow." "Not yet." He brushed snow from his coat. "But Jensen mentioned a widow over in Buffalo who's selling off livestock. If I can get some work at the Morrison Ranch, I could buy one. Trade labor for it, maybe." Nora stared at him, overwhelmed. He was talking about spring, about things that were months away, about a future that included him. "You really mean to stay?" she said quietly. Colt met her eyes, steady and sure. "I really mean to stay." Eli tumbled out of bed then, saw Colt, and let out a whoop of joy. "It snowed. Can we build a fort?" "After chores," Colt said, ruffling the boy's hair. "A man takes care of his responsibilities before he plays. You remember that?" "Yes, sir." Eli scrambled to get dressed, his small face serious with purpose. They ate breakfast quickly, cornmeal mush with molasses, and then Colt and Eli bundled up and headed out into the snow. Nora watched them through the window, saw Colt showing Eli how to clear a path, how to stack snow so it wouldn't drift against the door. Her son followed every instruction with intense concentration, desperate to please this man who'd become his hero. She understood the feeling. She was half in love with Colt Mercer herself, though she was terrified to admit it. The day passed in quiet industry. Colt worked on the lean-to while Eli helped as best he could, carrying tools and holding boards steady. Nora tackled the washing, then started on bread, her hands working the dough while her mind wandered to dangerous territory. What would it be like if Colt truly stayed? If this became their life, not just borrowed time, but something real and permanent? She tried not to hope too hard. Hope was expensive, and she'd spent all her currency on it 3 years ago when Tom died. Around noon, riders appeared through the snow. 3 of them this time, and Nora's stomach dropped when she recognized Samuel Thornton leading them. With him were Frank Dawson and Sheriff John Garrett, a hard-faced man who'd never shown her anything but cold courtesy. Colt saw them too. He set down his hammer and walked to meet them, his posture deceptively relaxed. Nora grabbed her shawl and hurried outside, Eli at her heels. "Afternoon, Mercer," Sheriff Garrett said, his voice neutral but his hand resting on his gun belt in a way that wasn't friendly. "Sheriff," Colt's tone matched his, polite, guarded. "Something I can do for you?" "Got some concerns." Garrett shifted in his saddle. "Mr. Thornton here tells me you've been staying out at Ms. Hayes' place pretty regular. That true?" "I've been helping with repairs. That a crime?" "Depends on what kind of repairs." Dawson leered from behind the sheriff. "Word is you've been here awful late some nights." Colt's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. "Word is wrong. I camp down by the creek. Only time I'm here is daylight, working. You can ask Ms. Hayes." All eyes turned to Nora. She lifted her chin and stepped forward, ignoring the way her heart hammered. "Mr. Mercer has been nothing but respectful," she said firmly. "He's fixed my roof, patched my walls, and made sure my son won't freeze this winter. That's all." That's all. Thornton's voice dripped with skepticism. Nora, be reasonable. A man doesn't do all that for nothing. What's he getting in return? The implication made Nora's face burn. How dare you? Easy now. Sheriff Garrett held up a hand. Nobody's accusing anybody of anything, but you got to understand, Nora, folks in town are talking. A single woman, a stranger living on her property. He's not living on my property, Nora snapped. He's working on it. There's a difference. Is there? Thornton leaned forward in his saddle. Because from where we're sitting, it looks like you've taken up with some drifter, and that reflects poorly on the whole community. The community that turned me away when I asked for help? Nora's voice shook with anger. That community? The one that watched me and my son go hungry and did nothing? You'll forgive me if I don't much care what they think. You should care, Garrett said, his tone hardening. You got a boy to raise. What kind of example you setting, having some man around without benefit of marriage? The word hung in the cold air like an accusation. Eli pressed against Nora's side, his small body trembling, and something in her snapped. Get off my land, she said, her voice low and fierce. Garrett's eyebrows rose. Now, Nora, I said get off my land. She took a step forward. This claim may not be proved up proper, but it's still mine by right of my husband's service. And I'm telling you to leave. All of you. We're just trying to help. You're trying to shame me. There's a difference. Nora's hands clenched into fists. Mr. Mercer has shown me more Christian charity in 2 weeks than this town has shown in 3 years. So you can take your concerns and your gossip and your hypocritical judgment and leave. Now. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Colt stepped up beside Nora, not touching her but close enough to show solidarity. You heard the lady, he said quietly. Time to ride. Garrett's face darkened. You're making a mistake, Nora. Both of you. Maybe, Nora said. But it's my mistake to make. The sheriff held her gaze a moment longer, then jerked his horse's head around. Don't say we didn't warn you. Come on, boys. They rode off through the snow, and Nora stood shaking, adrenaline singing through her veins. Beside her, Colt let out a slow breath. That was brave, he said quietly. That was stupid, Nora countered, pressing a hand to her racing heart. They'll make trouble now. Let them try. Colt's voice held an edge she hadn't heard before, something hard and unyielding. I ain't letting anybody hurt you or Eli. I don't care who they are. Eli looked up at him, his eyes wide. You mean it? I mean it, son. The boy threw his arms around Colt's waist, hugging tight, and Nora watched something transform in the cowboy's face, saw the hardness soften into something almost tender. He rested one big hand on Eli's head, gentle as a benediction. It's all right, he murmured. Nobody's going to hurt your mama, I promise. It was a promise he shouldn't make, couldn't guarantee. But watching him hold her son, seeing the fierce protectiveness in his eyes, Nora found herself believing him anyway. That night, after Eli was asleep, Colt stayed later than usual. He claimed he wanted to finish installing a latch on the window, but Nora suspected the truth. He was worried the men might come back, worried about leaving her alone. They won't do anything tonight, Nora said, pouring him coffee. They're not that bold. Maybe not, but I don't trust Dawson or Thornton. Colt accepted the cup, cradling it in his scarred hands. Men like that, they think they got a right to control everything around them. When someone pushes back, they push harder. I know. Nora sat across from him, suddenly exhausted. I should have just kept quiet. Let them say their piece and leave. No, Colt's voice was firm. You stood up for yourself, for us. That took courage. Or foolishness. There's a fine line sometimes. He smiled slightly. But I'm glad you did it. They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling, the wind moaning outside. Nora studied him into the firelight, the strong lines of his face, the way his shoulders curved slightly forward like he'd spent a lifetime carrying heavy things. Can I ask you something? She said finally. Anything. Why didn't you ever settle before? You're what, 35, 36? Most men your age have families, homes. Colt was quiet for a long moment. 37, he said. And I guess I never found a reason good enough to stop moving. He turned the cup in his hands. My pa died when I was 8. Like I told you, my ma remarried when I was 14, a man who didn't want another man's kids around. So I left, figured I'd make my own way. That must have been hard. It was what it was. He shrugged. I worked ranches, saved money, sent some home to my sisters, moved when the work dried up. After a while, it became habit. I'd be somewhere 6 months, maybe a year, and then I'd get restless. Start thinking about what was over the next hill. So I'd move on. What changed? Nora asked softly. Colt looked at her, and his eyes held something raw and honest. You did. You and Eli. I look at what you got here, this little cabin, this hard life. Somewhere 6 months, maybe a year, and then I'd get restless. Start thinking about what was over the next hill. So I'd move on. What changed? Nora asked softly. Colt looked at her, and his eyes held something raw and honest. You did. You and Eli. I look at what you got here, this little cabin, this hard life, and instead of wanting to run, I want to stay. I want to help build something. He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. I want to belong somewhere, to someone. And for the first time in my life, I think maybe I could. Nora's throat tightened. You don't even really know me. I know enough. I know you're brave and stubborn and proud. I know you love your son more than your own life. I know you've been knocked down so many times you should have stayed down, but you keep getting back up. He leaned forward slightly. That's enough for me. Colt, I'm not asking for anything you ain't ready to give, he interrupted gently. I'm just telling you where I stand. So you know. So there's no confusion. Nora's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to tell him she felt the same, that she lay awake at night thinking about him, that she caught herself watching for him in the mornings, that the thought of him leaving made her chest ache, but fear held her tongue. I'm afraid, she admitted instead. Of what? Of this, of hoping, of letting myself believe. Her voice broke. What if you change your mind? What if you wake up one day and realize this isn't what you want? Eli can't go through that. Colt set down his cup and reached across the table. He didn't take her hand, didn't presume, just rested his own palm up in offering. After a moment's hesitation, Nora placed her hand in his. His grip was warm, calloused, steady. I can't promise I'll never make mistakes, he said quietly. I can't promise this'll be easy, because life out here never is. But I can promise I won't leave. I can promise I'll work hard and do right by you and Eli, and I can promise that when I give my word, I keep it. He squeezed her hand gently. That enough? Nora looked at their joined hands, at the contrast of his rough skin against hers. It should have felt presumptuous. Instead, it felt right. For now, she whispered. It's enough for now. They sat like that until the fire burned low, hands clasped across the scarred table, not speaking because words weren't necessary. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the valley in white silence. And inside, something fragile and precious began to grow, something that felt dangerously like a future. The next week brought more snow and bitter cold. Colt worked steadily, finishing the lean-to and starting on a proper chicken coop. He talked about the future like it was certain, about planting a garden in spring, about getting laying hens, about maybe clearing another acre for hay. Eli absorbed every word like gospel, following Colt everywhere, imitating his walk, his gestures, the way he tilted his hat against the sun. Watching them together made Nora's heart swell and ache at the same time. She'd been alone for so long, carrying everything herself. Now suddenly, the weight was shared, and she didn't quite know how to accept it. One afternoon, Colt rode into Sheridan for supplies. He'd been hesitant to leave them, but they needed nails and tar paper, and Nora insisted they'd be fine. She and Eli spent the day inside, baking and cleaning, trying not to watch the road too obviously. He returned just before dusk, his saddlebags full, and something else, a bundle wrapped in oilcloth that he handed to Eli with unusual solemnity. Go on, he said. Open it. Eli's hand shook as he unwrapped the package. Inside was a knife, small, well-made, the blade folded into a wooden handle. A boy's first knife, the kind that said he was trusted, that he mattered. It's yours, Colt said, but it comes with responsibility. You don't use it unless you need it. You keep it sharp and clean. And you never ever use it in anger, understand? Yes, sir, Eli breathed, his eyes huge. Good man. Colt showed him how to open and close it properly, how to hold it safely. Your pa would have given you one when you were ready. I hope you don't mind me stepping in. Eli looked up at him, his young face struggling with emotion. I don't mind, he said. Then, hesitantly, would it be okay if I called you Pa? Not to replace my real Pa, but just because you're here and he's not? Nora's breath caught. She looked at Colt, saw something unguarded cross his face, surprise, emotion, something that might have been joy or might have been fear. That's up to your mama, he said carefully, glancing at Nora. Nora's eyes burned with unshed tears. She looked at her son, at this good man who'd walked into their lives and refused to walk back out, and knew that whatever happened, they'd already crossed a line. Eli had already given his heart, and so, God help her, had she. It's all right with me, she said softly, if it's all right with Mr. Mercer. Colt, he corrected gently. And yes, son, it's all right with me. Eli launched himself at Colt, wrapping his skinny arms around the man's waist, and Colt held him tight, his eyes suspiciously bright. Over Eli's head, his gaze met Nora's, and something passed between them. An acknowledgement, an acceptance, a promise that didn't need words. They were becoming a family. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. Christmas came quietly. They had no decorations, no gifts beyond what Colt had already given. But Nora made Johnny cakes with the last of the molasses, and Colt surprised them with a small spruce tree he'd cut and dragged back, which they decorated with strips of cloth and strings of dried berries. Eli was beside himself with joy. He'd never had a Christmas tree before. Tom had always said they were foolishness, a waste of time. But Colt set it up near the fire and stepped back to admire their handiwork with the seriousness of a man appreciating fine art. Best tree I ever saw, he declared, and Eli beamed. That night, after Eli was asleep, Colt pulled something from his pocket and handed it to Nora, suddenly shy. I ain't much for gift-giving, he said, but I saw this in town and thought of you. It was a comb, nothing fancy, just plain carved wood, but smooth and well-made. Nora turned it over in her hands, overwhelmed by the simple thoughtfulness of it. Colt, I don't have anything for you. Don't need anything. He gestured around the cabin. I got this. Got you and Eli. Got a place that feels like home. That's more than I ever expected. Nora looked up at him, at this man who'd appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she'd been too afraid to speak, and made a decision. She set the comb down carefully and stepped closer. Colt, she said quietly, thank you for everything, for staying, for being you. He looked down at her, his blue eyes soft in the firelight. Nora? She didn't let him finish. She rose on her toes and kissed him, quick and gentle, barely a brush of lips. When she pulled back, her face was hot, her heart hammering. I'm sorry, she stammered. I shouldn't have... But Colt caught her hand, stopping her retreat. Don't apologize, he said roughly. His thumb traced over her knuckles, a whisper of touch. I've been wanting to do that for weeks, but I didn't think I had the right. Do you want the right? More than anything. This time when they kissed, it was slower, deeper. Colt's hand came up to cup her face, his touch reverent, and Nora felt something inside her crack open, something that had been frozen since Tom died, maybe longer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Colt rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said. Nora pulled back, startled. What? Marry me. He said it firmer this time, more certain. I know it's fast. I know we barely know each other, really, but, Nora, I'm 37 years old, and I ain't never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. And that boy in there, I love him like he's my own. So marry me. Let me take care of you both proper. Let me be your husband and his father, legal and right. Nora stared at him, her mind reeling. It was insane. They'd known each other less than a month. She should say no. should tell him they needed time, should be sensible. But when had being sensible ever gotten her anything but heartache? Yes, she heard herself say. Yes, I'll marry you. Colt's face transformed. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her once before setting her down carefully. You mean it? I mean it, Nora laughed, giddy and terrified and elated all at once. Though we should probably tell Eli before we tell anyone else. Tell me what? They both spun. Eli stood by his pallet, rubbing his eyes, his hair sticking up in all directions. Nothing, sweetheart, Nora said automatically. Go back to sleep. But Colt shook his head. No, he should know. He crouched down to Eli's level. Your mama and I are getting married. That means I'll be your pa, legal and proper. That all right with you? Eli's eyes went wide as dinner plates. Really? Really? You're going to stay forever? That's the plan. Eli let out a whoop that probably woke every animal within a mile and threw himself at Colt, then at Nora, then at them both together. They stood there in the firelight, the three of them wrapped in each other's arms, and Nora felt tears streaming down her face. They were tears of joy. The next morning, Colt rode into town alone. He came back hours later with a silver ring, nothing fancy, just a simple band that had belonged to his mother, and a date set with the circuit preacher for the first Sunday in January. It'll be quiet, he warned. Just us and whoever the preacher brings as witnesses. Unless you want more? Nora shook her head. Quiet is perfect. The weeks between Christmas and New Year passed in a strange, dreamlike haze. Colt continued working on the property, but now he worked with a different energy, the energy of a man building his own home, not just helping someone else with theirs. He talked about adding a room onto the cabin, about putting in a proper window on the east wall to catch the morning light, about a dozen small improvements that would make their life easier. Their life. Not hers. Theirs. Nora caught herself watching him constantly, still half afraid he'd disappear like smoke. But every morning he was there, and every night he kissed her goodnight before heading to his camp by the creek, proper and respectful, even though they both knew that would change soon. On New Year's Eve, they sat up late together while Eli slept. The cabin was warm, the fire crackling, and outside the world was silver with moonlight on snow. You nervous? Colt asked, his arm around her shoulders as they sat together on the bench. Terrified, Nora admitted. Are you? Scared witless. He smiled. But in a good way, like standing at the edge of something big and knowing you got to jump. What if we fail? The question came out small. What if this doesn't work? Colt turned to face her, his expression serious. Then we'll figure it out together. But Nora, I ain't planning on failing. I'm planning on waking up next to you for the next 50 years. I'm planning on watching Eli grow up into a good man. I'm planning on building a life here that's worth living. He touched her face gently. And I'm planning on loving you every day I got left. It was the first time he'd said the word love. Nora's breath caught. You love me? Yeah, Colt said simply. I do. Probably did from the moment I saw you standing outside that store too proud to beg. You got under my skin, Nora Hayes. And I don't want you out. Nora kissed him, pouring 3 years of loneliness and fear and desperate hope into it. When they broke apart, she whispered against his lips, I love you too. God help me. I do. God ain't got nothing to do with it, Colt murmured. This is just us. Making a choice. Choosing each other. They sat together until the fire burned to embers, holding each other in the dark. And outside the old year gave way to the new. 1884 dawned cold and clear, full of promise and possibility. On the first Sunday of January, they dressed in their best clothes, which wasn't saying much. Nora wore her only good dress, dark blue and carefully mended. Eli had been scrubbed until he shined, his hair slicked down with water. And Colt wore a clean shirt and vest, his hat in his hands, his face freshly shaven. They rode together to the small church in Sheridan, Nora's stomach churning with nerves. She'd expected the church to be empty, but to her surprise, a dozen people waited outside. Jensen from the trading post, a few ranch hands Colt had worked with, and even Mrs. Patterson, an elderly widow who'd always been kind to her. Thought you might want some witnesses, Jensen said, grinning his gap-toothed grin. Congratulations, Ms. Hayes. Nora's eyes burned. Thank you. All of you. The ceremony itself was simple. The preacher, an aging man named Reverend Collins, spoke about commitment and faith, about the sanctity of marriage and the importance of family. He asked them to make their vows before God and these witnesses, and when Colt said, "I do," his voice was steady and sure. When it was Nora's turn, she looked into his blue eyes and thought about everything that had brought them here. The hunger, the fear, the desperate hope, the impossible kindness of a stranger who'd become everything. "I do," she said, and meant it with her whole heart. Colt slipped the silver ring onto her finger, and she felt the weight of it settle like a promise. Then the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Colt kissed her in front of everyone, gentle and reverent, and someone cheered. Afterward, Jensen produced a bottle of whiskey, and they toasted on the church steps, ignoring the scandalized looks from a few passing townspeople. Nora didn't care. She was married. She had a husband who loved her, and a son who was beaming so hard his face might split. They were a family. As they rode back to the cabin, their cabin now, together, Eli chattered endlessly about the ceremony, about how Colt looked like a real gentleman, about how Mama looked pretty. Nora leaned against her new husband's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, and thought about the strange path that had brought them here. A month ago, she'd been starving and desperate, turned away from the last store in town. Now she was married to a good man who'd given her back her hope. "Happy?" Colt murmured, his arm around her waist. "Terrified," Nora admitted, "but yes, happy." "Good." He kissed the top of her head. "Because this is just the beginning." And watching the sun sink toward the mountains, painting the snow in shades of rose and gold, Nora finally let herself believe it. This was just the beginning. The cabin felt different that first night as husband and wife, though nothing physical had changed. Eli had fallen asleep almost the moment his head hit the pillow, exhausted from excitement, and now lay curled in his loft with the blanket pulled to his chin. Below, Nora stood by the fire, suddenly nervous in a way she hadn't been since she was 16. Colt moved quietly behind her, banking the coals for the night. She could feel his presence like a physical thing, warm and solid, and her heart hammered against her ribs. "Nora," he said softly. She turned. He stood there in the firelight, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his expression gentle and patient. "We don't have to," he started. "I mean, I know this happened fast. If you need time," Nora crossed the small space between them and kissed him, cutting off his careful words. When she pulled back, she kept her hands on his chest, feeling his heart beating as hard as hers. "I don't need time," she whispered. "I need you." Something flickered in his eyes. Relief, desire, tenderness all mixed together. He cupped her face in his work-roughened hands and kissed her properly, deeply, and Nora felt the last of her fear dissolve. This was right. This was real. What happened after was gentle and unhurried, two people learning each other in the soft darkness, and when Nora finally fell asleep in her husband's arms, she slept without nightmares for the first time in 3 years. Morning came cold and bright. Nora woke to find Colt already up, pulling on his boots as quietly as he could. She watched him through half-closed eyes, memorizing the line of his shoulders, the way his hair curled at his collar. "I can feel you watching," he said without turning around, a smile in his voice. "Can't help it." Nora stretched, feeling warm and drowsy and content. "Still can't quite believe you're real." Colt turned, and the look he gave her was so full of affection it made her chest ache. "I'm real, and I'm yours." He came back to the bed and kissed her forehead. "But I gotta get the fire going before Eli wakes up freezing." Practical man. Somebody's gotta be. He built up the fire and started coffee while Nora dressed, and by the time Eli climbed down from his loft, the cabin was warm and breakfast was underway. The boy looked between them, grinning like he knew a secret. "You're still here," he said to Colt. "Where else would I be?" "I don't know. I just thought maybe I dreamed yesterday." Colt ruffled his hair. "Wasn't a dream, son. Your mama and I are married. That makes me your pa now, legal and proper." "Forever?" "Forever." Eli threw his arms around Colt's waist, and Nora watched her husband hold her son, watched the easy affection between them, and felt something settle deep in her chest. Peace. She'd forgotten what it felt like. After breakfast, Colt announced he was riding to the Morrison Ranch to see about work. "They're always needing hands in winter," he explained. "Pays not much, but it's steady, and if I can bring in wages, we can start building up supplies for spring planting." Nora wanted to protest, wanted to keep him close, safe, where she could see him, but she understood necessity. Money was still tight, and they needed to think beyond just surviving to thriving. "Be careful," she said, helping him into his coat. "Always am." He kissed her, quick and sweet, then swung up onto his horse. "Should be back by dark. You and Eli stay warm." They watched him ride away, and Nora felt Eli's small hand slip into hers. "He'll come back, Mama," the boy said confidently. "I know, sweetheart. Because he's Pa now, and Pa's don't leave." The simple faith in his voice broke something in Nora's heart and mended it at the same time. She squeezed his hand. "That's right. He'll come back." The day stretched long without Colt. Nora kept busy with washing and mending, while Eli practiced with his knife, carefully whittling sticks the way Colt had shown him. Every so often, the boy would look up and ask, "How long till he's back?" "A few more hours." "Do you think they'll give him work?" "I hope so." "Me too. Then we can get that cow he talked about. And chickens. I like chickens." Nora smiled. "Since when?" "Since Pa said we could have them." The casual use of Pa still made Nora's throat tight. Eli had taken to it so naturally, as if Colt had always been there, and maybe in some way he had. Maybe they'd been waiting for him without knowing it. The sun was sinking toward the mountains when they heard hoofbeats. Eli flew to the window. "He's back, Mama! He's back!" And he was, riding through the winter twilight with something that might have been satisfaction on his face. Nora stepped onto the porch, her heart lifting at the sight of him. "Well?" she called as he dismounted. "Got work." Colt's grin was rare and brilliant. Morrison himself was there, remembered me from a job I did 5 years back. Said any man who could break a horse without breaking its spirit was worth hiring. $3 a week, plus I can bring home any game I shoot on the property. $3 a week. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more than they'd had. Nora felt tears prick her eyes. "That's wonderful." "It gets better." Colt climbed the steps, his eyes bright. "He's got a milk cow he's willing to sell cheap. She's getting old, but she's still producing. Says if I work an extra week without pay, she's ours." "Colt, that's—" Nora couldn't finish. She threw her arms around him, breathing in the smell of horse and cold and him. "Hey now." He held her gently. "What's this?" "I'm just happy," she managed. "So happy I don't know what to do with it." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "Get used to it, Mrs. Mercer. This is just the start." Mrs. Mercer. The name sent a thrill through her. She was married. She had a husband who worked hard and came home and held her like she was precious. That night, they celebrated with venison stew. Colt had shot a deer on the way home, and Eli talked so much about the future cow that Nora finally had to send him to bed just to get a word in edgewise. "He's excited," Colt said, amused. "He's not the only one." Nora sat beside him on the bench they'd pulled close to the fire. "I keep waiting to wake up and find this was all a dream." "Not a dream." Colt took her hand, turning it so the silver ring caught the firelight. "This is real. You're stuck with me now. I can think of worse fates." He laughed, low and warm, and pulled her close. They sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the fire crackle and the wind outside. After a while, Colt spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "You know, I've been thinking about names." "Names?" "For the place. Every homestead should have a name." He gestured vaguely at the cabin, the land beyond. "Something that means something." Nora considered. "What did you have in mind?" "Haven't decided yet. Thought maybe you should choose." "Me? It's your land. Was your husband's first, now it's ours together. Seems right you should name it." Nora thought about it, about everything this place had been and everything it was becoming. A place of survival, yes, but also of hope, of new beginnings. "Hope Creek," she said finally. "Because the creek runs through it, and because—" She paused, searching for words. "Because this is where I learned to hope again." Colt was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. Hope Creek, I like that. He squeezed her hand. Hope Creek it is. They kissed in the firelight, sealing the name like a promise, and outside the wind sang through the valley that was becoming home. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt almost like normal life. Colt left before dawn each morning to work at the Morrison Ranch, riding through cold and sometimes snow to put in long hours breaking horses and mending fences. He came home after dark, tired but satisfied, and always with stories for Eli about the horses he'd worked with or the men he'd met. Nora kept the home fires burning, literally and figuratively. She cooked and cleaned and mended, and when she had time, she started working on a quilt from scraps of fabric Colt had brought home. It would be their marriage quilt, she decided, something to mark this new chapter. Eli thrived under the routine. He had chores now, real chores that mattered, not just busy work. He hauled water, stacked firewood, learned to set snares for rabbits under Colt's patient instruction. The boy was growing, filling out slightly now that there was regular food, and his laugh came easier. He's happy, Nora said one night, watching Eli sleep peacefully in his loft. So are you, Colt observed. He sat on the edge of their bed, she still got a thrill from thinking it, pulling off his boots. I am. Nora moved to help him with the laces, her fingers gentle on the worn leather. Sometimes I feel guilty about it. Why? Because Tom's only been gone 3 years. Because I should probably mourn longer. Because people will think... She stopped, shaking her head. People will think what they always think, Colt said quietly. Let them. You got a right to be happy, Nora. Tom wouldn't want you suffering forever. You didn't know him. No, but I know you. And I know any man worth his salt would want his widow taken care of, his son raised right. If our situations were reversed, he paused, his jaw working. If I died and you were alone with Eli, I'd want someone to step up, someone good. I wouldn't want you grieving yourself into the grave. Nora looked at him, at this man who spoke so easily about sacrifice and care, and felt her love for him deepen another notch. You're a good man, Colt Mercer. I try. He pulled her close, resting his chin on her head. Now stop feeling guilty and come to bed. Morning comes early. She did, and fell asleep in his arms, warm and safe and home. 2 weeks into February, Colt came home early with news. Morrison had agreed to let him take the cow now, with the understanding that Colt would work an extra 2 weeks to pay off the balance. She's gentle, Colt said, his excitement barely contained. Name's Bessie. She'll give us milk, butter, cheese if we're lucky. Morrison's throwing in a laying hen, too. Says she's old but still productive. Eli was beside himself. When do we get them? Tomorrow, if the weather holds. Colt looked at Nora. We'll need to finish that lean-to proper, make sure it's tight, can't have them freezing. They spent the evening working by lantern light, Colt and Eli reinforcing the lean-to while Nora stitched together feed bags to make a warm covering. The work felt good, purposeful, building toward something. True to his word, Colt arrived home the next day leading a brown and white cow and carrying a crate with a rust-colored hen inside. Bessie was indeed old, her muzzle gray, but her eyes were kind and she came along placidly. The hen squawked indignantly about the journey but settled quickly once released into her new home. Eli was enchanted. He spent an hour just sitting in the lean-to, watching Bessie chew her cud and the hen scratch for non-existent bugs in the hay. He's going to sleep out here if you let him, Nora observed, standing with Colt in the doorway. Can't blame him. First real livestock we've had. Colt's arm came around her waist. Next spring, we'll get more chickens. Maybe a pig. Start building up properly. You really think we can do this? Make this place into a real working homestead? I know we can. His confidence was absolute. We got the land, we got the will, and we got each other. That's more than most people start with. Nora leaned into him, watching her son commune with their new animals, and let herself believe. They could do this. They were doing it. That night, Eli insisted on checking on Bessie and the hen 3 times before bed. Each time, Colt patiently accompanied him, showing him how to make sure they had fresh water, that the lean-to was secure against predators. You're good with him, Nora said when Eli was finally asleep and Colt had returned inside. He's a good kid, easy to be good with. Colt shed his coat and moved to the fire to warm his hands. He reminds me of myself at that age, hungry for guidance, for someone to show him how to be a man. Did you have that? After your father died? Colt was quiet for a moment. For a while. That ranch foreman I told you about, he taught me a lot. Taught me that being a man wasn't about being hard or cruel. It was about being steady, keeping your word, doing what's right even when it's difficult. He looked at her. I try to pass that on to Eli. He worships you. He shouldn't. I'm just doing what any decent man would. That's where you're wrong. Nora came to stand beside him. Most men wouldn't have stopped that day in town. Most men wouldn't have stayed. Most men... Her voice caught. Most men aren't you. Colt turned to face her, his expression serious. I'm not perfect, Nora. I got a temper when pushed. I'm stubborn as a mule about some things. I can't read or write more than my name. I ain't educated or refined. I don't want educated or refined. Nora put her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady beneath her palm. I want you exactly as you are. He pulled her close and kissed her, deep and thorough, and for a long moment the world narrowed to just the two of them, the fire crackling, the night beyond the walls. When they finally broke apart, Colt rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said quietly. Don't think I say it enough, but I do. You and that boy, you're everything to me. I love you too, Nora whispered. So much it scares me sometimes. Don't be scared. His hands cupped her face, gentle despite their calluses. I ain't going anywhere. You're stuck with me. Promise? Promise. They stood together in the firelight, holding each other against the cold, and Nora felt the last of her fear finally release its grip. He wasn't leaving. He was here, solid and real and hers. March arrived with brief hints of thaw, though winter wasn't ready to relinquish its hold yet. Colt continued working at the Morrison Ranch, and the steady wages were building up a small cushion of savings. They had enough now for seed in spring, maybe even enough for lumber to add that extra room Colt wanted. Life felt almost comfortable, which should have been a blessing. But Nora had learned that comfort often preceded trouble. It came on a cold afternoon when Colt was at work, and Eli was outside checking on Bessie. Nora heard horses and looked up to see 3 riders approaching. Her stomach dropped when she recognized them, Frank Dawson, Pete Riley, and a man she didn't know, hard-faced and mean-looking. She stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron, trying to project calm she didn't feel. Mrs. Mercer, Dawson said, and the way he said her married name made it sound like an insult. Heard you had a wedding. Congratulations. Thank you. What can I do for you, gentlemen? Just wanted to check on you. Riley's smile was oily. Make sure everything's proper. Everything's fine. My husband will be home soon, if you'd like to speak with him. Oh, we know where your husband is. The third man spoke for the first time, his voice rough. Working for Morrison, making $3 a week. That's not much to support a family on. Nora's spine stiffened. We manage. Do you? Dawson leaned forward in his saddle. See, the thing is, Nora, folks in town are concerned. A widow marrying some drifter nobody knows, rushing into it. Colt's not a drifter. He's a ranch hand with steady work. For now. The third man spat tobacco juice. But what happens when Morrison don't need him no more? What happens when he gets restless and moves on? You thought about that. He's not going anywhere. That's what they all say. Riley's voice was falsely sympathetic. Look, we're just trying to help. There's men in town, good men with property and prospects, who'd court you proper if you were available. I'm not available. I'm married. Marriages can be annulled, the third man said bluntly. Especially when they're rushed, especially when there's questions about the circumstances. Nora's blood went cold. What are you suggesting? Just that if you want it out, there's ways, and there's men who'd be happy to step in, respectable men. Get off my property, Nora's voice shook with rage. Right now. Now, Nora, I said get off my property. She stepped down from the porch, her hands clenched into fists. I'm married to Colt Mercer by choice, before God and witnesses. And if you or anyone else has a problem with that, you can take it up with him directly. But you don't come to my home and insult him when he's not here to defend himself. That's cowardice. Dawson's face darkened. You're making a mistake. The only mistake I'm making is wasting time talking to you. Leave, now. For a moment, she thought they'd refuse. Then Eli emerged from the lean-to, carrying his small knife like a weapon, his young face fierce. You heard my mama, he said, his voice high but brave. Leave our land, the third man laughed. Got yourself a fierce little protector there, Nora. His name is Mrs. Mercer, Eli said firmly. And this is our land, all of ours. So get out. Something in the child's bravery seemed to amuse them. Dawson shook his head, still smirking. All right then, we'll go. But you remember what we said, Nora. When that husband of yours shows his true colors, don't say we didn't warn you. They turned their horses and rode off, and Nora stood shaking, watching until they disappeared over the rise. Then her legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the porch steps. Eli ran to her. Mama, are you all right? I'm fine, baby. She pulled him close, breathing hard. You were very brave. They were mean. Yes, they were. Pa's not going to leave, is he? The fear in his voice broke her heart. No, sweetheart, he's not. Promise? I promise. But even as she said it, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered doubts. What if they were right? What if Colt did get restless? What if she'd trusted too much, too fast? She crushed the thoughts down ruthlessly. She'd made her choice. She'd chosen Colt, and he'd chosen her. And she wouldn't let poisonous gossip undo that. When Colt came home that evening, she told him everything. His face grew progressively darker as she spoke, and by the time she finished, his hands were clenched so tight his knuckles were white. They came here, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. They came to our home and threatened you. They didn't threaten exactly. They implied I'd leave, that you should annul our marriage. That's a threat, Nora. He stood abruptly, pacing. I should ride into town right now. No. Nora caught his arm. That's what they want. They want you to lose your temper, to do something stupid so they can prove you're dangerous. I am dangerous when it comes to you and Eli. I know, but please, don't give them ammunition. She pulled him to face her. We know the truth. We know you're staying. That's what matters. Colt's jaw worked. After a long moment, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. I'm not leaving, he said fiercely. I don't care what they say or do. I'm not leaving you. Ever. I know. Do you? He pulled back to look at her. Because if there's even a shred of doubt, there's not. Nora said it firmly and realized it was true. The doubts had lasted maybe 5 minutes before she'd dismissed them. I trust you, Colt, completely. Some of the tension left his shoulders. Good, because I meant every word of those vows. For better or worse, richer or poorer, I'm yours. And I'm yours. They held each other in the firelight while Eli watched from his loft. And outside the wind howled, but inside they were safe. Together. The incident with Dawson and his friends cast a shadow over the next few weeks, but life continued. Colt worked, Nora kept house, Eli grew. Bessie produced milk faithfully, and the hen laid eggs almost every day. They were building something real, a life, a home, a future. In late March, the first real thaw came. Snow melted in rushing streams, and the creek swelled with runoff. The valley began to show hints of green, and birds returned, filling the air with song. Spring, Nora said one morning, standing on the porch and breathing in air that smelled of mud and growing things. Almost. Colt came up behind her, slipping his arms around her waist. Another few weeks and we can start planting. I've been talking to Morrison about getting seed. He'll let me have some at cost. What should we plant? Corn, definitely. Beans, squash if we can manage it. Potatoes. Those will keep us fed through next winter. He rested his chin on her head. This time next year, we'll have a full cellar and a garden that's thriving. You watch. Nora leaned back against him, letting herself imagine it. A garden full of vegetables. Shelves stocked with preserves. Maybe more chickens, another cow. A real homestead, productive and sustainable. I believe you, she said softly. Good. They stood together watching the sun rise over the mountains, painting the valley in shades of pink and gold, and Nora thought about how far they'd come. 4 months ago, she'd been standing outside Thornton's store, starving and desperate. Now she was married to a good man, her son was thriving, and they had a future stretching out before them. It wasn't perfect. Money was still tight, the cabin still leaked when it rained hard, and the townspeople still whispered. But they had each other, and that was enough. More than enough. That night, after Eli was asleep, Colt pulled something from his pocket and handed it to Nora. "What's this?" She unfolded the paper carefully. It was a deed, official and legal, with both their names written in careful script. "Had Morrison's lawyer draw it up," Colt explained. "The land's in both our names now, legal and proper. If anything happens to me, don't say that." "Nora," his voice was gentle but firm, "if anything happens to me, I need to know you and Eli are taken care of. This way, the land is yours free and clear. Nobody can take it from you." Tears blurred her vision. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did. You're my wife. This is our land. It should reflect that." Nora threw her arms around him, overcome. He held her close, his hand moving in slow circles on her back. "I love you," she whispered against his chest. "So much." "I love you too." He kissed the top of her head. "Now and always." They went to bed wrapped in each other's arms, and outside the spring wind blew soft and warm, carrying the promise of new beginnings. The next morning, Nora woke to find Colt already up, standing at the window and staring out at something. She rose, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, and joined him. "What is it?" "Look," he pointed. In the yard where snow had covered everything for months, the first shoots of green were pushing through the mud, wild grass, hardy and determined, claiming its space in the world. "It's starting," Colt said quietly. "Spring's really here." Nora took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Yes," she agreed, "it's starting." And standing there in the early morning light, watching new life emerge from frozen ground, Nora felt something settle deep in her soul. They'd survived the winter, literally and figuratively. They'd weathered cold and hunger and gossip and doubt. Now it was time to grow. Spring came in earnest after that morning, transforming the valley from white and barren to green and alive. The creek ran high with snowmelt, and the cottonwoods along its banks unfurled new leaves that shimmered silver in the wind. Wildflowers appeared overnight, lupine and Indian paintbrush, columbine and wild roses, turning the meadows into a patchwork of color. Colt spent his days off breaking ground for the garden, turning soil that had been frozen solid for months. Eli worked beside him, learning to handle a spade properly, learning the difference between good dirt and poor. Nora watched them from the porch, her hands busy with mending but her eyes following her husband and son as they worked together in the spring sunshine. "Here," Colt said, crouching down to Eli's level. "Feel this soil. See how it crumbles? That's good. Means it'll drain proper, won't drown the seeds." Eli squeezed the dark earth in his small fist, his face serious with concentration. "Like this?" "Exactly like that. You got good instincts, son." The praise made Eli glow, and Nora's heart swelled watching them. This was what family looked like. This was what home felt like. By mid-April, they had a garden plot turned and ready. Colt brought home seed from Morrison, corn, beans, squash, potatoes, and they spent a whole day planting, working row by careful row. Colt showed Eli how to space the seeds properly, how deep to plant them, how to mark each row so they'd know what was coming up. "This is our future we're planting," Colt said, straightening and surveying their work with satisfaction. "Come summer, this will be full of food. Come fall, we'll have enough to last the winter, and then some." "And next year?" Eli asked hopefully. "Next year we plant even more. Maybe add some fruit trees if we can afford them. Build this place up proper." That night, Nora cooked the last of the winter stores, beans and salt pork, and they ate it, knowing that soon there would be fresh vegetables, corn on the cob, new potatoes roasted in their skins. The lean times were ending. "I got news," Colt said after supper, his tone careful in a way that made Nora look up sharply. "What kind of news?" "Good news. Morrison's herd is calving, and he's short-handed. Asked if I'd take on extra hours through May, help with the birthing and branding." He paused. "It's long hours, dawn to dusk, sometimes later, but the pay's double." Nora's first instinct was to protest. She'd gotten used to having him home at night, used to falling asleep in his arms and waking beside him, but she saw the hope in his eyes, understood what that extra money would mean. Security. Breathing room. A cushion against disaster. How long? She asked instead. 6 weeks, maybe 8, depending on how the calving goes. That's a long time. I know. Colt reached across the table and took her hand. But Nora, if I do this, if I work these extra hours and save every penny, we could have enough to add that room by fall. Maybe even get another cow, start our own small herd. Eli perked up. Could we get a horse? A real one, just for me? Maybe, Colt said, smiling. If you keep working hard and learning, a horse is a responsibility, not a toy. I know, I'd take care of it, I promise. Nora looked between them, her 2 men with their dreams and plans, and made her decision. All right, take the extra work. We'll manage. Relief crossed Colt's face. You sure? I'm sure. We've come this far by working hard, no reason to stop now. So it was settled. Starting the next week, Colt left before dawn and returned after dark, often too exhausted to do more than eat, kiss Nora goodnight, and collapse into bed. But every Saturday, he brought home his wages, and the small tin where they kept their savings grew steadily heavier. Nora and Eli fell into their own rhythm during those long days. They tended the garden together, watching for the first green shoots to emerge. They cared for Bessie and the hen, collecting milk and eggs. Eli practiced his letters. Nora had started teaching him to read using an old Bible she'd kept from her teaching days, and his knife skills, whittling small animals from scraps of wood. Look, Mama, he said one afternoon, holding up a crude but recognizable horse. It's for Pa, for when he comes home. He'll love it, Nora said, and meant it. The days were long, but they weren't lonely anymore. The cabin felt lived in, warm, full of purpose. And every night when Colt came home, no matter how tired he was, he made time to listen to Eli's stories about the day, to examine whatever the boy had made or learned, to kiss Nora like she was precious. How much longer? Nora asked one night in early May, curled against Colt's side in their bed. 3 more weeks? Maybe 4. His arm tightened around her. I know it's hard. It's not hard, Nora interrupted. I mean, I miss you. But I understand why you're doing it, and I'm proud of you. She felt him relax slightly. I miss you too. Miss being here during the day, seeing Eli learn things, working on the place with you. It's temporary, and it's worth it. Yeah. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. It is. They fell asleep like that, wrapped together, and Nora dreamed of a future where money wasn't so tight, where they could breathe easy, where the only worry was whether it would rain enough for the crops. In mid-May, the garden began to produce in earnest. Tender lettuce leaves, radishes bright and crisp, peas that Eli ate straight from the vine. Nora made salads for the first time in months, and the fresh greens tasted like victory. It's working, Eli said, kneeling in the dirt and examining a bean plant with its first tiny pods forming. Pa said it would, and it is. Your pa's a smart man. The smartest. Eli looked up at her, his face earnest beneath the too long hair that needed cutting. Mama, are we rich now? Nora laughed. No, sweetheart, we're not rich. But we got food and animals, and Pa's making money. That seems pretty rich. Out of the mouths of children, Nora thought. By the standards of 4 months ago, they were rich beyond measure. You're right, she said, ruffling his hair. We are pretty rich. The boy beamed and went back to examining his beans, and Nora stood there in the spring sunshine, feeling wealthy in ways that had nothing to do with money. The trouble when it came started small. Colt came home one evening in late May looking troubled, his usual easy smile absent. What's wrong? Nora asked immediately. Probably nothing, but he didn't sound convinced. Had some visitors at the ranch today, Dawson and Riley nosing around asking Morrison questions about me. Nora's stomach dropped. What kind of questions? Where I came from, how long I planned to stay, whether I had any trouble in my past. Colt shed his coat and hung it carefully on the peg, his movements controlled. Morrison sent them packing, told them my business was my own, but it bothers me that they're still sniffing around. They want you to leave. Yeah, or they want to find something they can use against us. He turned to face her. Nora, I need you to tell me, is there anything about Tom's death, about the homestead claim, anything that could cause us legal trouble? Nora thought hard. The claim lapsed because I couldn't prove up the land, couldn't work it and improve it like the law required. But that's not illegal, just failed. And Tom's death was clean. Army documented everything, sent his pay and pension until it ran out. There's nothing shady. Good. Because if they're digging, I want to make sure there's nothing to find. He pulled her close, resting his chin on her head. I won't let them hurt you or Eli, whatever it takes. I know. But as she held him, Nora felt the old fear stirring again. They'd built something good here, something worth protecting, and there were people who wanted to tear it down. The next incident came a week later. Nora had taken Eli into town for supplies. A rare trip, but necessary. They'd kept to themselves, avoiding eye contact, just wanting to get what they needed and leave. But as they were loading their purchases into the wagon, Martha Cunningham approached. Nora, she said, her voice dripping false concern. How are you managing? We never see you in church anymore. We're managing fine, thank you. And your husband? He's still around? Nora's jaw tightened. My husband is working at the Morrison Ranch, as you well know. Oh, of course, Martha's smile was pure poison. It's just that people talk. They say he's been asking around about land prices, about claims available in Montana. Makes one wonder if he's planning to move on. It was a lie. Had to be a lie. But the words hit Nora like a fist. That's not true, isn't it? Well, I'm sure you know your own husband's mind. Martha's expression suggested she thought otherwise. I just worry about you, dear, and poor little Eli. It would be such a shame if history repeated itself. First one husband gone, then another. My husband isn't going anywhere, Nora said, her voice shaking with rage. And even if he were, it would be none of your concern. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work to do. She climbed onto the wagon, pulled Eli up beside her, and drove away without looking back. But Martha's words echoed in her head all the way home, poisonous and insidious. When Colt came home that night, she told him everything. His face went dark with anger. That's a damned lie, he said flatly. I haven't asked about any land. I haven't even thought about Montana except to be glad I'm not there. I know. But Colt, they're spreading rumors, trying to turn people against us, or make me doubt you, or I don't know what they want. They want me gone and you desperate enough to accept help from one of their respectable men. Colt's voice was hard. They want to erase me from the picture. That's not going to happen. No, it's not. He took her hands, his grip firm and steady. Nora, look at me. I'm not going to Montana. I'm not going anywhere. This is my home. You and Eli are my family. Nothing and nobody is going to change that. Promise me. I promise. He pulled her close and she buried her face in his chest, breathing in the familiar smell of him, horse and hay and honest sweat. I promise on everything I hold sacred. I'm yours and you're mine, and that's how it's going to stay. Eli appeared in the doorway of his loft, his young face worried. Are the bad men coming back? No, son, Colt said firmly. And if they do, they'll have to go through me first. Can I help? You help by taking care of your mama when I'm at work, by being brave and smart and good. That's the best help there is. Eli nodded solemnly, accepting this responsibility, and Nora felt a fierce rush of love for both of them, her son trying so hard to be strong, her husband teaching him how. They weathered the rumors the same way they'd weathered everything else, by holding tight to each other and refusing to let go. Colt finished his extra hours at the Morrison Ranch in early June, and the money he'd saved was more than Nora had seen in one place in her entire life. $60, he said, counting it out on the table with reverent care. 60 actual dollars. Eli's eyes were huge. That's a fortune. It's a start, Colt corrected. A good start, but just a start. He looked at Nora. What do you think, room addition first or livestock? Nora considered. The cabin was cramped, especially now that Eli was getting bigger. But more animals meant more food security, more to sell or trade. What do you think we need most? She asked. Honestly, the room. We need space, proper space for Eli as he grows. Space for us. Maybe eventually space for... He stopped, color rising in his cheeks. For what? Nora asked, though she thought she knew. For more children. If that's something you want. Nora's breath caught. They'd never talked about it. Not directly, but standing there looking at her husband's hopeful, slightly nervous expression, she realized she did want it. Wanted to have his child. Wanted to give Eli siblings. Wanted to fill this home they were building with life and noise and love. I want that, she said softly. Colt's face lit up like sunrise. He crossed to her and cupped her face in his hands, kissing her thoroughly. Then we'll build that room. Make it proper. Make it a real home. It's already a real home, Nora said. But yes, let's build. They started work the following week. Colt took on a partner, a carpenter from Sheridan named Robert Chen, who owed Morrison a favor and agreed to help in exchange for fresh beef and vegetables. Together, they framed out an addition on the east side of the cabin, 12 feet by 12 feet that would serve as a bedroom for Eli, giving the main room back to Colt and Nora. Watching the structure take shape was surreal. Nora stood in the yard, hand shading her eyes, watching her husband work shirtless in the summer heat, his muscles moving beneath sun-bronzed skin, and thought about how impossible this would have seemed 6 months ago. You're staring, Eli observed, coming to stand beside her. I'm admiring the construction. You're staring at Pa, Eli corrected, grinning. It's okay. He stares at you too when you're not looking. Nora felt her face heat. Go check on Bessie, she said, trying to sound stern and failing completely. The boy laughed and ran off, and Nora went back to staring, admiring, watching her husband build their future one board at a time. The room was finished by mid-July, complete with a real window, proper door, and enough space for a bed, a chest, and room for Eli to play. The boy was ecstatic, immediately claiming it as his domain and arranging his few possessions with careful pride. This is the best room ever, he declared, standing in the middle and turning in a slow circle. I'm glad you like it, son. Colt stood in the doorway, dusty and tired, but smiling. You earned it, working as hard as you did this spring. Can I really sleep here, tonight? It's your room. You can sleep here every night. Eli threw his arms around Colt, then ran to hug Nora, then back to Colt, unable to contain his joy. Watching him, Nora felt tears sting her eyes. Her son had gone from a half-starved child living in desperate poverty to a healthy, happy boy with his own room and a father who loved him. The transformation was miraculous. That night, after Eli was settled in his new room and finally asleep from excitement, Colt and Nora lay together in their own bed, enjoying the privacy for the first time since they'd married. This is nice, Nora murmured, her head on his chest. Having space. Being able to talk without worrying about waking him. Among other things, she could hear the smile in Colt's voice. Among other things, she agreed, smiling herself. They made love slowly, leisurely, taking their time now that they had the luxury of privacy, and afterward lay tangled together, drowsy and content. Nora? Colt's voice was soft in the darkness. I'm happy. Really happy. I didn't think I'd ever feel like this, but I do. Nora lifted her head to look at him. Like what? Like I belong somewhere. Like I'm part of something that matters. He stroked her hair, his touch gentle. Like I'm home. You are home, Nora said firmly. This is your home. We're your home. I know, and that's... His voice caught. That's everything. They held each other in the dark, two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely way, and Nora thought about how strange life was. 6 months ago, she'd been starving. Now she was lying in her husband's arms, her son safe and happy in the next room, planning for a future that stretched out bright and full of promise. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For stopping that day in town, for not walking away, for staying when you could have left, for choosing us. Colt pulled her closer. Best decision I ever made. August brought the full heat of summer and the first real harvest from their garden. Corn ripened on the stalks, beans hung heavy on the vines, squash sprawled across the ground, producing fruit faster than they could eat it. Nora spent her days preserving and canning, putting up food for winter, and the shelves in the cabin began to fill with jars of beans and corn and pickles. "Look at all this," Eli said one evening, surveying the growing collection with pride. "We're not going to be hungry this winter." "No, son," Colt agreed. "We're not." It was a promise they could keep now. Between the garden, Bessie's milk, the eggs from their 3 chickens, they'd acquired 2 more, and Colt's steady wages, they had enough. Not luxury, not wealth, but enough. And enough felt like everything. In early September, Morrison approached Colt with an offer. One of his hands was retiring, and he wanted Colt to take over as head wrangler, a permanent position with better pay and a small house on the ranch property if they wanted it. "I told him I'd have to talk to you first," Colt said that evening, laying out the details. "It's more money, $5 a week, and it's permanent. But it means more responsibility, longer hours sometimes. And the house, it's bigger than this place, newer, but it's not ours. We'd be living on Morrison's land." Nora thought about it. More money would be security they'd never had. But this cabin, this land, it was theirs. They'd bled for it, worked for it, built it up from nothing. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I want whatever you want." Colt took her hand. "This is our decision, Nora. Together. Could we keep this place? Keep improving it, maybe rent the Morrison house temporarily while we build up our own homestead?" Colt's eyes lit up. "That's smart thinking. Morrison might go for that. We'd be on hand for emergencies, but we'd still have our own place. I could talk to him." "Do it." Morrison agreed to the arrangement, and by October they had moved into a small but comfortable house on ranch property while keeping Hope Creek as their own. It was strange at first, living in a place with real glass windows, a proper stove, wooden floors instead of packed earth. But they filled it with their presence, made it feel like home even knowing it was temporary. The real home was still the cabin by the creek, where they'd survived the worst winter of their lives and come out stronger. That would always be home. Winter came again, but this year they barely noticed the cold. They had food enough for an army, fuel for the fire, warm clothes Nora had made from fabric Colt bought. Eli grew like a weed, shooting up so fast his pants were always too short. And in February, Nora missed her monthly courses and realized with mingled joy and terror that she was pregnant. She told Colt on a Sunday morning, nervous despite herself. They were walking together along the creek, their creek, at their cabin, checking on things as they did every week, and the words just came out. "I'm going to have a baby." Colt stopped walking, stopped breathing, maybe. Then he turned to her, his eyes wide. "You're sure?" "Pretty sure, all the signs are there." "A baby." He said it wonderingly, like testing out the word. Then his face broke into the biggest smile she'd ever seen. He swept her up and spun her around, laughing. "We're having a baby!" "Careful," Nora laughed, dizzy and delighted. "You'll shake it loose!" He set her down carefully, immediately solicitous. I'm sorry. Are you okay? Do you need to sit down? Should we go back to the house?" "Colt, I'm fine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." But he fussed over her all the way back. And when they told Eli that evening, the boy's reaction was equally enthusiastic. "A baby? Really? Can it be a brother? I want a brother." "We don't get to choose," Nora said, laughing. "It'll be whatever it is." "But I want a brother," Eli insisted. "Someone to teach things to, like Pa teaches me." "You'll be a good big brother either way," Colt assured him. "Boy or girl, they'll be lucky to have you." Eli puffed up with pride, already taking his future responsibilities seriously. The pregnancy progressed easily. Nora was sick for a few weeks in the spring, but after that she felt strong and healthy. She continued her work, only slowing down in the last months when her belly made it difficult to bend over. Colt watched her like a hawk, constantly worried she was doing too much, and she found his protectiveness both annoying and endearing. "I'm not made of glass," she told him in June when he tried to stop her from hoeing the garden. "I know, but that's my child you're carrying. Our child. I'm going to worry." "Then worry quietly and let me work. I'll go crazy if I have to sit around all day." He relented, but only partially. Eli was conscripted into helping his mother with anything that required bending or lifting, taking his role as protector very seriously. In late July, as the garden was producing its second summer's bounty and the heat lay thick over the valley, Nora woke in the middle of the night with the first pains. "Colt," she said, shaking his shoulder. "It's time." He was up instantly, fumbling for his boots in the dark. "Now? Right now?" "Yes, now. Go get Mrs. Patterson." The widow had agreed to serve as midwife, having delivered half the babies in the county over the years. Colt rode through the darkness like the devil was chasing him and returned with Mrs. Patterson within the hour. By then, the pains were coming stronger, and Nora gripped the bedpost, breathing hard. "How long between?" Mrs. Patterson asked, all business as she rolled up her sleeves. 5 minutes? Maybe less." "Good. Everything's moving along proper." She looked at Colt, who was hovering near the door, looking terrified. "You, out. Go boil water, keep young Eli calm, and stay out of the way." "But, out." The old woman's voice brooked no argument. Colt kissed Nora's forehead, whispered, "I love you," and retreated. Nora heard him in the next room, talking quietly to Eli, who must have woken from the commotion. The labor lasted through the night and into the next day. It was hard, painful, exhausting work, but Mrs. Patterson talked her through it with the calm competence of long experience. And when the sun was high in the sky, when Nora thought she couldn't push anymore, she heard it. A baby's cry. "It's a girl," Mrs. Patterson said, beaming as she wrapped the squalling infant in a clean cloth. A perfect, healthy girl. Nora held out her arms, and the midwife placed the baby in them. She was tiny, red-faced, furious at being born, and absolutely beautiful. "A daughter," Nora breathed, tears streaming down her face. The door burst open and Colt rushed in, Eli right behind him. They both froze, staring at the bundle in Nora's arms. "It's a girl," Nora said, smiling through tears. "Eli, you have a sister." Eli's face fell for just a moment. Clearly he'd had his heart set on a brother, but then the baby turned her head and he caught sight of her tiny face. His expression transformed into wonder. "She's so small," he whispered. "She'll grow." Colt sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his eyes locked on his daughter. "Can I—" Nora transferred the baby to his arms, and Colt held her with the same careful reverence he'd shown that first day splitting wood in their yard, like she was precious, like she mattered more than anything. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I'm your pa." The baby stopped crying, her unfocused eyes trying to find his face. Colt's expression crumpled slightly, overwhelmed, and he looked at Nora with tears in his eyes. "We made this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You and me. We made a whole person." "We did." "What should we name her?" Eli asked, peering at his sister with intense interest. Nora and Colt looked at each other. They'd talked about names but never settled on one. "Hope," Nora said suddenly. "Her name should be Hope." Colt smiled, understanding immediately. "Hope Mercer, after the place where we found each other." "Hope," Eli tested out the name. "I like it. Hi, Hope. I'm your big brother, and I'm going to teach you everything." The baby made a small noise, and they all laughed, the sound filling the small house with joy. Mrs. Patterson finished cleaning up and took her leave, promising to check back in a few days. After she left, the four of them, Colt, Nora, Eli, and Tiny Hope, sat together in the afternoon light, becoming a family all over again. "Thank you," Colt said quietly, his eyes on Nora. "For what?" "For her, for Eli, for this." He gestured vaguely at everything, the house, the life they'd built, the impossible journey that had brought them here. For taking a chance on a stranger who showed up with nothing but good intentions. Those good intentions changed everything, Nora said softly. "No." Colt shifted Hope carefully, then reached for Nora's hand. "You changed everything. You and your courage and your willingness to hope, when you had every reason not to. You saved me, Nora, not the other way around." Tears spilled down Nora's cheeks. "We saved each other." "Yeah," Colt agreed, his voice thick. "I guess we did." They sat like that as the sun tracked across the sky, holding their children, holding each other, holding on to the life they'd built from nothing but hope and hard work and stubborn love. Outside, the valley stretched green and gold in the summer light. The garden was full, the animals were healthy, and Hope Creek waited for them, their land, their home, their future. It had been 10 months since a starving widow was turned away from the last store in town. 10 months since a stranger said 3 words that changed everything. Ride with me. 10 months and a lifetime. Nora looked at her husband, this good, steady man who'd kept every promise he'd ever made, and thought about that December day. How cold it had been, how desperate she'd felt, how impossible hope had seemed. "What are you thinking about?" Colt asked, catching her expression. "That day in town, when you first spoke to me." "What about it?" "I was so scared," Nora admitted, "so afraid to trust you, afraid you'd leave, afraid you'd hurt us, afraid to hope." "But you took the chance anyway." "I did." She squeezed his hand. "Best decision I ever made." Colt smiled, that rare, brilliant smile that transformed his face. "Mine too." Eli, who'd been quiet, suddenly spoke up. "Pa? Yeah, son? You're not ever going to leave, right? Even now that Hope's here and we're all together?" The question carried the weight of a 7-year-old's lingering fears. Colt set Hope carefully in her makeshift cradle and pulled Eli close. "Listen to me," he said seriously. "I gave my word I'd stay, and I meant it. But more than that, I want to stay. This is my family. You're my son. Hope's my daughter. Your mama's my wife. This is where I belong. Understand?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Because I'm going to be here for every birthday, every Christmas, every scraped knee and bad dream and good day. I'm going to be here when you're grown with kids of your own. I'm not going anywhere, Eli. That's a promise." Eli hugged him tight, and Nora watched her 2 men, one grown, one growing, and felt a peace so profound it almost hurt. They stayed together as evening came on, reluctant to break the spell of this perfect day. Eventually, Nora dozed, exhausted from labor, and woke to find Colt sitting by the window with Hope in his arms, rocking her gently while Eli slept on the floor nearby. "You should rest," she murmured. "I will. Just wanted to hold her a little longer." He looked down at the sleeping baby. "She's perfect, Nora. Absolutely perfect." "She is. They both are." "Yeah." He glanced at Eli, sprawled in sleep the way only children could. "We did good." "We did." Colt carried Hope over and laid her in the cradle beside the bed, then climbed in next to Nora, pulling her close. They lay there in the gathering darkness, listening to their children breathe, and Nora thought about everything that had led to this moment. The hunger, the fear, the desperate choice to trust a stranger, the slow building of faith, of love, of family, the hard work and harder winters, the gossip and the doubts, and the moments when it seemed like too much. All of it had led here, to this moment, this family, this life. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Colt whispered back. "All of you. Forever." And lying there with her husband's arm around her, her children safe and sleeping, Nora finally let go of the last of her fear. This was real. This was lasting. This was home. Outside, the stars came out one by one, painting the Wyoming sky with light. The creek ran its eternal course through the valley, and somewhere in the darkness, Hope Creek waited. Their land, their legacy, the place where a cowboy and a widow had found each other and built something worth keeping. In the morning, they would wake and tend the animals and work the garden. Colt would go to his job at the Morrison Ranch, and Nora would care for their children, and Eli would practice being a big brother. They would face whatever challenges came with the same stubborn determination that had gotten them this far. But tonight, they rested. A family, complete and whole and home. And if sometimes, in the years that followed, people asked how they'd met, Nora would smile and say, "He saw me when no one else would, and he stayed when he could have left." And Colt would add, "She took a chance on a stranger with nothing but good intentions. Changed my whole life." And that was the truth of it. Simple and profound. 2 people who'd needed